All right. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Welcome to this morning's audit committee meeting. It's great to see everyone here. Just your volume. It might be just a button. We're having audio issues over here beside me. Got it? Okay. It's great to see everyone here, whether you're joining us in person in the Champlain room or virtually on Zoom. We have 3 items to consider today. The first is a report from Finance and Corporate Services on the City of Ottawa's consolidated financial statements. Cyril Rogers, General Manager of FCSD and Chief Financial Officer, will provide a presentation of about 10 minutes long. Staff from KPMG will follow with a presentation summarizing their audit findings, which should also take about 10 minutes. We'll vote to carry the report and send it to Council for consideration. Next is a report on the sinking fund financial statements. There's no presentation for this item, but we'll be taking questions if there are any. The committee will vote to carry that report and send it to Council. We'll then go to the Office of the Auditor General next for their audit of supportive housing. There'll be a motion to consider the report since it was issued separately from the agenda. Auditor General Natalie Goujon will introduce the item, and Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein and Audit Principal Ria Khan will deliver a presentation on the report. After the presentation, the OAG will take questions from committee members, followed by questions from other members of Council. After questions to the OAG, of course, we'll go to questions to City staff. We'll vote to receive the report and send it to Council for consideration. All righty, let's get started. Now, note that simultaneous interpretation is not available for this meeting. Sorry about that. We have no regrets, and I'll ask the committee coordinator to call the roll, please.
Councillor Brown.
He's coming. He's there.
I see your online councillor. Councillor Carr.
Present.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Vice Chair Hubley.
Here.
Chair Curry.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you very much. So item 2, declaration of interests. I've heard none to date. Confirmation of minutes from the minutes of Tuesday, April 29th, 2025, AC minutes 11. Are these minutes carried? Carried. All right. Item number 4, Finance and Corporate Services Department, 2024 City of Ottawa Consolidated Financial Statements.
Morning, Chair, members of committee. So today I'm before you to kind of present the 2024 December 31st financial statements. This is a very technical accounting type presentation, so I'll try and kind of keep it as simple as I can. You know, I also am joined with our partners, KPMG, Andrew and Ennis to the left of me, and then Kevin's online as well to provide support. Following my presentation, I'll pass it directly over to KPMG to do their presentation on their audit and their findings. Before I jump in, as I'm waiting for the presentation to load up on screen, I will say, you know, what's the key message? Things are good, as I've been saying, in terms of our financials. The financial statements will show that as well. And KPMG will speak to, you know, the findings in terms of what they do through their annual financial audit process. So we can move on to the next slide. So again, the preceding slides would try and be a way for us to try and summarize at a somewhat a relatable level what our financial statements means. So first up, we do have our statement of operations, which is kind of like your P&L type view. Overall, we are reporting a surplus of 794 million for 2024. Again, this is different than what you see when we present our budget. Throughout the budget process, you know, municipalities are required to put forward a balanced budget. So all your expenses you're planning and spending equals your revenue that comes in, but it excludes certain things in our budget that would be picked up in the financial statement process. You know, as a reminder, our financial statements are presented at a Canadian public sector accrual accounting standard, and our budget is presented on a modified cash balance, cash basis. So again, there's differences in how we treat some things. As an example, in our budget, we don't actually budget for amortization, depreciation on our assets, versus in our statements we do. In our financial statements as well, we also pick up all of our other entities, if you will. So it captures Hydro Ottawa, our BIAs, Ottawa Community Housing, et cetera. So it's really a consolidated view of all things from a financial perspective, whereas our budget is truly what I would deem as more operating accounting, management accounting process. So that's really the technical jargon if I was to simplify it. Overall, our revenues did increase year over year. And one thing that you'll see common as I go through the presentation is financial statements are really about, comparability, comparing to the previous year. So we're always going to use 2023 as a comparator in terms of the results ending in 2024. So our revenue increase, just shy of 100 million, 99 million. Again, that's just a factor of increases in our taxation, increases in our user fees, increases in development charges, et cetera, normal year over year. Expenses increased by around 3.7%. So again, as we look at our operating, expenditures, this is increases in our compensation, our utilities, inflation, et cetera. So nothing extreme when it comes to a year over year as a 3.7% increase. You can move on to the next slide. This slide is basically, what we deem as a statement of financial position, also known as a balance sheet view. It really reports the assets, liabilities, and the overall equity in the organization. So I'll just kind of touch on a few of the key items there. If you look at net debt, that's the difference between our financial assets and our liabilities. At the end of 2024, our net debt was 4.1 billion. Again, this is then offset by that non-financial assets, which is really your tangible capital assets, which is now, close to 24 million as we continue to invest in the capital assets across the city. The net book value of our capital assets did increase by 1.5 billion in 2024, mainly driven by two things, which shouldn't be a surprise. It won't be a surprise. LRT and waste and water and wastewater. Again, LRT, biggest capital infrastructure that we've seen at the city. That's been driving our increase in tangible capital assets now for a number of years, which will continue until it's fully up and running. And as you've seen earlier this week, for those that were at FinCorp, our water, wastewater, stormwater infrastructure, very capital intensive program. That's where our largest kind of investments are year over year. Nothing different there from the past number of years. So again, that increase in those two areas is what's driving that. Then you move down to what we deem as the accumulated surplus, which is really the difference between your net debt and your financial assets. That's growing, which is good. Really, if I were to simplify that, that's really, the continuing growing in our equity. So the equity and the value of all of our assets in the organization continues to increase overall. That's a good thing. Next slide, please. Continuing on to some of the other details, I'll just try and highlight a few things here as we go through. From an accounts receivable perspective, those are slightly down. Again, these, mainly driven by some changes in government funding claims year over year as programs come and go, things shift. That's where you're seeing a little bit of a shift there. If you look at the investment from government business enterprise, Hydro, so that's our equity stake in Hydro. So that's really as a sole subsidiary owner of Hydro, that's reported into our financial statements. Again, not part of our budget process if you're trying to draw a correlation between the two documents. As a reminder, in our financial statements, we look at the full equity stake of Hydro. In our budget, we pick up the dividends. So on an annual basis, we get $20 million from a dividend perspective. So we do budget that. That's kind of cash that we get in that we can spend on a year over year basis, but then the statements picks up the total equity value of Hydro. You can move on to the next slide. So again, continuing down, accounts payable, accrued liabilities, that's decreased by just over 400 million. Again, primarily driven by the LRT project overall, the Trillium line, which reached substantial completion in late 2024, November 2024. Deferred revenue, this is basically, there's scenarios where we get money for programs where we haven't spent that money on the things we're supposed to spend it on. So things like development charges come in until we actually spend that money, we treat it as deferred revenue. In 2024, there was also some funding for childcare. That money kind of came in and we'll start spending that this year. So we kind of treat that as deferred revenue. And then we move it over as we incur the expenses to match up to that. If you look at the P3 liability, this is new for 2024. So there's a little bit of a change in the accounting standards related to public-private partnerships. Again, this relates to the Trillium line expansion, which reached substantial completion over November of 2024. Move on to the next slide. Moving into some of the other, employee feature benefits, again, these have increased in 2024, mainly driven by WSIB related claims, which is, really related to the increased exposure to cancers. Past number of years, you've seen cancer has been added into, that envelope of WSIB things. We see the uptake there when it specifically comes to our fire services as an example. If you move, these liabilities are basically benefits earned today, which we have a future obligation for in the future. So we record that. The amount payable in the current year is budgeted each year, and that changes year over year based on the actual actuary assumptions that we use and work with third-party company to do that. One of the biggest changes overall is the post-employment benefits, which increased by 15 million based on the actuary estimation, which we do on an annual basis. And then we do have the Ottawa Superannuation Fund, which basically does that indexing for us. And that was a 2 million decrease based on reductions in the CPI in 2024. Next slide, please. We move into debt. So again, debt is used for capital expenditures. You've heard me talk about that a number of times, continue to talk about that. Words like the discipline of debt, good debt, bad debt. Really, we use that debt for long assets, waste, water, et cetera, where there's feature benefit. Overall, this is kind of I'll call it one little metric. If you look at the gross capital value of our assets, the amount of debt that we have is only 10.8%. If you were to correlate to that to be more simple, if you had $1 million home, you have a $108,000 mortgage. So that's pretty conservative when you look at it that way. It's a lot of equity in what we have. If you go back to that first slide, the accumulated surplus, again, that's 19.7 billion. So that kind of reflects, the equity that we have and what we kind of manage. Again, when you look at overall, our overall net long-term debt has increased slightly. We did issue debt in 2024, and then we do have additional repayments that we kind of draw that down. In 2024, the main debt that we issue was related to Atisoki and LRT and the new police headquarters at South facility. So again, we really try and focus most of our debt on these bigger, long-standing type capital infrastructure projects that have a 20, 30, 40 plus useful life. That allows us to manage our debt to be more affordable longer term. Overall, again, if you look at overall debt from a own source revenue perspective, so the money we get from our taxes, the money we get from our user fees and our rate program, it's really at 4.7% when you compare it to the 8.5% established by this council. Again, you've heard me talk about this a number of times. The municipality from the Municipal Act is governed by a 25% level set by the province. Council has endorsed this fiscal framework where we have that reduced to 8.5% overall, and we're actually ended the year at 4.7%. So again, not to oversimplify it, that's a good kind of level of debt when you look at the value of our assets, that 10.8 versus, that $108,000 mortgage on $1 million home. Next slide, please. So again, this is basically a little bit of a spread of how our tangible capital assets are distributed. As we've talked about before, again, as you link this back to the programs, the asset management plans to make it more relevant to this committee, water, wastewater, that's one of the bigger areas of capital, tangible capital assets. Again, a very capital intensive program. So that's where you see a large component of our assets. LRT, no surprise there. So that concludes my presentation. I'll pass over to my colleagues at KPMG to go through the next part.
And Andrew?
Yes.
And Andrew, maybe you're going to do this anyways, but if you could introduce your fellow partners there and explain to the committee and obviously the audience their skill set in case they want to ask different questions. I know I have one.
Is it not on? Oh, sorry, I'll start again. It's not like I'm a rookie at this or anything. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Cyril, for the introduction earlier. I am Andrew Newman. I am your independent external audit partner for the audit of the financial statements that Cyril did such a great job presenting just now. I would like to introduce two people. First, to my left is Ines Grubasek, who is the audit manager and runs our audit team and works with your team throughout the audit. So I always like to joke she does all the work and I take all the credit. So, but she is here today to help me with any detailed questions, should there be any. And also on the Zoom call is my co-partner, Kevin Travers. Those of you who were on the committee last year met Kevin in person. He is online and very much available for questions. Kevin is the independent auditor of the City of Toronto and also served many years as our lead for cities, for our city practice across Canada. I also want to thank the management and staff of the city for their participation in the audit. Now, you usually think that's the finance team, which was led ably by Miriam Mesquita this year, but our audit touches pretty much all areas of the city administration, but in particular, information technology, human resources, facilities, legal, and other areas I'm sure that I've forgotten. So, and we got full participation, Madam Chair, for the audit. I also want to commend this committee for giving us this time, and in particular, the chair, who is very open to confidential discussions that I have with her at least twice a year, asking certain questions that are mandated by Canadian auditing standards. If we move to the next slide, on the status, and I do want to point out this report was written at May 26th and filed on May 26th. So things have moved along from May 26th to today, June 6th. And of the items remaining to be completed at May 26th, there is some small outstanding audit items. Ines's team is actually working hard today to clear those. And in addition, we are still waiting for our actual report on your actual report to be finalized. That will happen next week. But I do not believe that there will be anything actually out of that report. And then here we are today down at this the second last bullet. We are completing the discussions here today with the audit committee, and then we will obtain evidence of the council's approval of the financial statements, and at that point we'll obtain the management representation letter signed by Cyril. And we anticipate that approval June 18th, I believe, is the council meeting where this is going. Yep. So
Just double checking on the June 18th, because we have a council meeting June 11th. And then usually it would be 2 weeks after. Unless we have two in a row and I'm not aware of it.
oh,
June 11th is the next one. So
so
the
is it
next one,
25th maybe?
June 25th.
Okay, 25th.
Yeah. Sorry, our Auditor General has a comment.
The reports for today's committee are going to council on Wednesday, June 11th.
Oh, this one as well. It's going on the 11th. Okay, so it's not the 18th, it's the 11th.
Okay. That's good to know. So then if I can go to the next slide, the auditor's report that we anticipate providing to the committee is it will be the quote, the clean opinion, the unmodified opinion that you should be looking for. And it will state that the consolidated financial statements are, in our opinion, are presented in all material respects in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So that's good. There will be an additional paragraph in that auditor's report for those of you who like to read them and say, hey, this is not a usual paragraph around the implementation of the public-private partnership standard that Cyril walked you through. If I can go to the next slide with the highlights. So as mentioned, the new accounting standard is the public-private partnerships. The impact is disclosed in note 26 of your statements, and it was the $135 million liability that was recorded. It basically represents what you have to pay to run the Trillium line in to the private partner. The other new auditing standards for us to apply, and we spoke at this last November, is around audit of group financial statements. Group means consolidated financial statements. What that did, and it's really just for us, is it made hydro being assessed a non-significant component for purposes of the audit. You wonder, well, how is that the case? It's because it's accounted for on a one-line basis. It is used what we call the equity method. But in addition, it is audited separately, right? So we don't have to retrace the steps for the audit of the Hydro Ottawa. That's basically what that means in layman's terms. And then significant risks that we identified during planning, we talked about consolidation, of course, is a significant process here for the city. Cyril went through the many different areas that are including these financial statements that are all wrapped up in a consolidation workbook. So we do spend extra attention on that. And then those of you who have sat on audit committees before, and I think I've met most of you on those, know that as auditors, we do have a presumed risk that the financial statements may be materially misstated due to fraud, and we cover off that risk by paying extra attention to journal entries, to estimates, and to any significant unusual transactions. And that work has been done, and nothing came to us that we did not identify anything that would cause us concern. And if I can go to the next slide, which is the final slide, other highlights on how the audit went. We did find a few things, which is not unusual for an entity the size of the city. Fortunately, they are all reclassification errors. So what is a reclassification error? That's accountants and auditors moving things around the financial statements. What it means is there's not an issue here with the approval or the recording of these transactions. It's just we don't like what line item they are recorded on. And really the first two are really moving amounts of 9.8 and 6.2 between accounts payable, deferred revenue, and EFB liability. So if you were opening your statements, those are 3 lines basically in a row, all going to total liability. So your total liability amount did not change, but there is some reclass that could be done. All of those relate to community housing and how it rolls up through that consolidation process. And then the other reclassification error is around recording of realized gains on investments. And this is very much accounting, 4th year accounting, and being recorded as income instead of through remeasurement gains, i.e. unrealized gains. So that again is a reclass between those two items. Control deficiencies, good news, we did not identify any significant deficiencies in internal control. Excuse me. Don't know what happened there. But we will have some performance improvement observations with management. And I think I'll stop there.
Okay.
Yeah, I am okay. Sorry about that, Madam Chair.
Okay. So are there any other speakers? Are you,
I'm done.
and you're done? Okay. Well, it was good timing.
In more ways than one. See, it's coming back now.
All right. So committee, we're open for questions. Who has some questions? Counselor Kitts.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair. Just one question. I believe the report pointed out that the federal and provincial transfers have decreased substantially, decreased by 116 million. So I was just hoping you could unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, these are really the ebbs and flows of the programs. Obviously, from an LRT perspective, we're kind of in the back end of that funding kind of coming to an end. That program, so that's probably one of the bigger drivers, if you will. The other things is really just basically normal year over year timing things. So nothing of significance other than LRT now kind of rolling off, sunsetting from that funding perspective. The other stuff is relatively just timing.
So not a red flag, not something we should be concerned about.
I mean, at the end of the day, any red flag we bring forward through other things, like we always want to make sure we get more funding from, housing, any program at all, but nothing of significance that was a red flag for this perspective from here.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering about the P3s and their if they're a strain on our budget in terms of the debt. And I'm just concerned because they don't always, they often go higher in cost, and I'm
Mhm.
thinking about the stage 2 LRT. I'm watching it being built, and it's a very complicated process. And also, let's face it, there's sometimes wrangling and who pays for what. So how is that resolved through the accounting process?
Um, maybe I can just talk to the accounting on, and Cyril can talk about the impact on budget or whatnot. So what the accounting standard did, and it's a brand new standard in Canada, it's one of the first in the world around public-private partnerships. And as you know, public-private partnerships have grown in popularity over the last 10 to 15 years. Essentially, what it does is in a public-private partnership, the public entity commits to paying a stream of payments over a number of years, usually 25 or 40 or even more, for the operation of the entity and for the build of the entity. What the standard does is says, okay, when the entity goes, or when the project goes into service, and your line went into service in November, as Cyril said, you need to record that liability because you have that requirement to make those payments over the next 25, 40 years or whatever. How that impacts the budgetary side, I will certainly pass that to Cyril.
Yeah, so I mean, from a budget perspective, we do have I'll call it a relatively robust procedure and process to follow for when we do enter into P3s. I mean, obviously LRT is a P3, the Don Reed facility, paramedics was a P3 a few years back. And really, you know, there's just many different components of that in terms of risk transfer. The procurement process and the policy is relatively robust in terms of what we follow. I wouldn't say there's a concern from the impact to our budget or our financials from the existing P3s that we have. Obviously, coming out of the provincial inquiry and those discussions, we've addressed all those concerns and added more process steps, robust things to our procedures for P3s moving forward. But it really comes down to a case by case basis in terms of, not only is the financial benefit sometimes in P3s, it's the risk element as well that we look at from a total perspective.
Yeah, I'm wondering how other jurisdictions handle that, because sometimes they do get out of control and they're far more than what we signed up for. What lessons have we learned from others on this?
What I can say from a, kind of parking the financial side of the equation from a procurement perspective is we do get other municipalities within Ontario and across Canada reaching out for our policies and procedures, just because the evolution of where we've been as an organization in P3s and the diligence we do. So we tend to provide more guidance and our process and procedures to others versus us learning from them just because of where we've came from in the last number of years.
And Andrew, did we want to ask Kevin that question then? What Councillor Kavanaugh is asking, other jurisdictions, how do they handle this?
He is there. I'm sure he is ready. Kevin, did you hear the question?
I did. Hopefully you can hear me this morning. It's a tough question to answer. I think the comments made this morning are good ones in the sense that they have become more common and they will continue to become more common. And I think a lot of the complexities are also going to evolve. So I think it's as much as anything what you're seeing other municipalities are doing are exactly what you've heard this morning, reaching out to others, understanding where there's been problems, understanding where there's been situations where the partners may not have delivered on what they have said that they would, or where there's other challenges that come out of those right now. But I think as much as anything, it's the type of thing where staying on top of things, identifying risks, and ensuring that there are milestones that you can monitor across the way. So that's what I would say that I've seen is what early days other municipalities have garnered in terms of lessons learned.
Are we telling people what not to do? That's what it sounds like.
I mean, I'm not sure if there's a question there or not, but I would say yes, right? I mean, these are things that, like anything, it evolves. Every P3 is unique. And then that makes the next P3 more unique. So the more you can evolve, collaborate, work with your partners across the board, whether it's, our external firms or municipalities and colleagues, that's what we do, right? And it's really a case by case basis.
Thank you.
Councillor Hill?
Thank you, Chair. Did the audit this year look at the city revenue generation from the vacant unit taxes? Specifically, were there any red flags or risks that were identified in terms of process, legality, or applicability?
I'm used to it being green ones. Thank you, Councillor Hill, for the question. The vacant unit tax amounts would certainly be part of the audit from a revenue perspective. I would say we did not go in the depth of your question, though, because we're looking at, whether they're recorded appropriately, et cetera, and they were. But we did not go into great detail on how we audited each the different transactions within that tax.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, as this committee knows, but as a reminder, we do have an audit process within the VUT program itself. So just to add on to what Andrew said, we do also do other auditing internally on programs, specifically like the VUT.
And sorry, could you refresh me, Cyril, on how councillors are updated on that internal audit process for the VUT?
Through the chair, yes. So we'll be coming back. I don't want to say I can't remember if it's later this fall or not, but we're committed to come back as we've been going through this program with an update on that. So we've finished the full cycle of the audit program. So I think we're coming back in the fall. I can certainly follow up with you and your staff offline to let you know for sure. Yep.
Appreciated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, but I have a few. That's a hard thing about being a chair, but I do have some questions. So I'm sure the upload of the LRT by the province, when that happens, will be probably more than just a year out. But say if it did actually all happen within the next year, what would we notice that would be quite different in our financial statements if that happens?
So through the chair, complex question, because it really is a complex process. So if I were to keep it simple, one scenario could be if the train and the track, that asset goes up, then our tangible capital asset value that you've seen on one of the slides, 19.7 billion, would go down. So we would see a reduction in the asset value, but more importantly, we would see a reduction in the liabilities in terms of paying for that. Because right now we have we got to pay for that over the next 30 years as an example. So we'll see our liabilities reduce, but we'll also see the asset value reduce. We'll see our debt load reduce. Net, we will see an improvement, but you'll see the three main lines would be our liabilities, our tangible capital assets, and our debt would be shifting around, improving.
All right. Thank you. It's just something for us to think about for when we go through this again next year.
Yeah.
Andrew, yeah.
If I just may, on that, from an audit perspective, that clearly meets the definition of a significant unusual transaction. You don't move stuff up to the province every year, et cetera. So it would have specific audit attention to that, around that it is accounted for correctly within the agreement between the province and the city at the time. And you said the impact on the statements, you could anticipate 2-3 pages of additional notes around that transaction, I would suspect.
All right. Now, just similarly, the upload of 174, I would say would be very different though, would it not? Because it's a road. It's not like an actual, operational thing.
Through the chair, so it would be different, but technically the same kind of idea, right? So I would expect that will be called out as well when that final transaction occurs in that year. Then you'll see some attention brought to that through our audit partners in terms of how that has been treated, where it was treated, and how it rolls through our statements.
Okay. The reason I saw it as different is when, Andrew, you were saying about the liability begins when it's operational. Well, the road is always operational, or is that just would not be considered a P3 at all?
So through chair, so that wouldn't be a P3. So this is to your point. So the 174 is an asset that we own today. We have no outstanding mortgage on it, if you will. We just basically budget for the annual maintenance and then the capital infrastructure to maintain it. So as we're going through the due diligence process, whatever that valuation is, so we're working closely with the province and they have a third-party firm involved in understanding what that valuation looks like. That will be reviewed by staff when they're ready. And then at that point, the value of the asset goes up. So it's almost like, there is no liability on that. So our asset goes down, but then there could be cash transaction, or it could be some other sort of agreement. Again, that will be reported back from a update on the Ontario Ottawa deal perspective. And then from a, if you wrap it all together, that'll flow through these statements in that respective year audit, and that'll be accounted for and highlighted there.
Okay, interesting. This will be fascinating to watch, actually. Andrew, where you talked about the reclassification errors,
Yep.
often I've heard at audit committee where sometimes auditors have a difference of opinion that's more like philosophical. Would you say that kind of those kind of conversations took place, or this was truly just an error?
So from an audit perspective, you would find the similar errors in the prior year as well. It is how the community housing corp flows in through your records on the consolidation, where the amounts end up in technically the wrong line item, right? So of the 9 million and the 6.2 million, I would remind councillors, your materiality is 130 million, your posting is 6 million. So these are just breaking the threshold for for information for this committee. So I would not worry too much about it. The numbers are coming in correctly from the community housing. It's just they're just getting allocated into the wrong line.
Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to highlight Hydro Ottawa is done separately, but KPMG are also the auditors for Hydro Ottawa. Is that not correct? Yes.
That is correct, but it's a completely different team.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Fair enough. But still, there would
Yes.
be some line of
Yeah.
sight if there
Yeah.
were any issues.
Yes.
Okay. And then the other thing I was going to ask is why is it that we're getting this new accounting standard for P3s? Like, this seems to me to be something that should have been done a long time ago.
Oh, Madam Chair, you're putting me on the spot, being former Vice Chair of PSAP. So I can tell you, it takes about 10 years to get to an accounting standard from like initial identification. So I was part of the Public Sector Accounting Board when this was put on a project plan, and the discussions took 6 or 7 years to get there. There's not a corresponding international standard because 3Ps are more popular in Canada because of because our government sector is so large compared to other countries. So that's one of the reasons why it took longer, is because there's no international standard to look at. The process is you have a task force that looks at the standard, and it was quite controversial around how to record the debt, discount rates, things such as that. The task force was actually chaired by our local partner, Bailey Church, who some of you will know, who's quite well known in the municipal sector. That task force included engineers, finance specialists, et cetera. So it just wasn't a bunch of accountants. So that took a while to come to ground on the standard.
And Chair, I think you would agree. The reason why it took so long was not the accounting folks, it was the engineers and the other folks.
This is very important to note.
My opinion.
Thank you for that. My final.
Mr. Church is wearing some scars, so you can probably relate to.
Oh, I can imagine. My final question is to Kevin, just in terms of an overall comment about other municipalities and what you are seeing or that you noticed different or you'd like to share with us. Anything we might want to know about?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the question. If I were to just try to identify what's happening in recent times, obviously every municipality, like every organization in Canada, is trying to understand the impacts of what the noise coming from south of the border may be doing from their business planning standpoint, their resiliency strategy. So that's something that everyone's starting to think about, and it's got onto the agenda. I think from a pure accounting standpoint at the municipal level, every municipality continues to struggle with their accounting for tangible capital assets in the sense that it's something that's done as a bolt-on at the end of their financial reporting because it's not a business as usual type of item. So I still see the reporting issues with that, the transfers from assets under construction into active assets. So when you turn on the amortization for each of those items tends to be problematic or challenged still from a financial reporting standpoint. So those are just some quick observations. I'm not sure if you'd like me to dive in deeper on any of them, but happy to share those this morning.
I'm wondering if you have any anything else we can read. I'm not sure if other people have questions. They don't have their hands up right now, but is there anything else that you could point us to that we could learn more?
Oh boy. Let me think about that, and I can circle back through Andrew if there's items that we could otherwise refer you to.
Okay, super. Well, thank you very much. committee members, one of our concerns is about this council meeting. Like, you thought it was the 18th, it's 11th, but there's another meeting on the 25th.
Yeah.
So do you have a comment on that? Like there are some
But-
options or what
Right,
would
yeah.
it mean?
Sorry, and that might just be my mistake on the 18th. I think I might have maybe just read the calendar wrong. Last year the statements did go out on the 25th, so it's really your choice on what ones. They are required by June 30th, so either one of those council dates would fit the legislative standard.
And Cyril, any thoughts?
I would say there's no reason not to go to council next week. There's fairly,
11th?
yeah, June 11th would be what I would suggest.
Would you be okay with that then, Andrew?
The only risk with that, Madam Chair, is the actuarial work that still needs to be completed. So whether that's done by the 11th or not would be a little touch and go.
Okay. So, let me go to Eric. What we know is that it's on the agenda for what? So currently it's on the agenda for the 25th.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
audit, this report goes to the 11th. But financial statements go to the 25th.
Okay.
So we don't need a motion then to change anything? Correct. Okay, you happy with the 25th?
Yeah, very. Yeah.
Okay.
That explains some of the confusion.
Well, yes, it's clear, very, very clear. Honestly. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. The report recommendation is that the audit committee recommend council approve the 2024 City of Ottawa consolidated financial statements. Are they carried? Carried. All right. Okay, thank you very much. As always, lovely to see all of you.
And thank you to whoever brought me this water. He was a lifesaver.
Right over there. Glad to be of help. All right, the sinking fund financial statements. No presentation. Okay, so this is just questions. I did say that. Did you have any questions, sinking fund? It's got the best name in town. Sinking fund, as opposed to a stinking fund or. No. No questions on the sinking fund? We often talk about this at other meetings, eh? We did the other day. No questions on the sinking fund. Consolidated or financial statements. Okay. So the report recommendation is that the audit committee recommend council approve the sinking fund financial statements for 2024. Are they carried? Carried. Thank you. Nice and loudly. I could hear that. Okay. So thank you all very, very much. And now we will turn to the Auditor General.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just before we get started, I was hoping to do a little reminder. I'm just waiting for our presentations to come up here, but do a little reminder with regards to the public input survey that we have. So for residents that might be listening right now that aren't aware, we are currently seeking your input into our next 2-year audit plan. So if there's anything that you're hoping that we might consider, our public engagement gives you that opportunity to do so. On the slide right here, there's a QR code just for ease of reference to get to. And to members of committee and members of council that are joining us today, if you haven't done so, I'd encourage you to please share with your constituents because their feedback is very, very important to us. So perfect.
Thank you, Madam Auditor General. So thank you for starting that way because I technically have to add this audit to the agenda. I missed that little step, so that was perfect. So make sure you share this work plan survey. It's a very important survey. And so I've shared it already. Thank you, Councillor Carr. And so I'm moving to Vice Chair Hubley. If you could help us with adding this to the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. So whereas the report on this item was issued separately from the agenda and published on June 5th, 2025, therefore be it resolved that the Audit Committee approve the consideration of the report for the item at today's meeting pursuant to subsection 89(3) of the Procedures Bylaw, being bylaw number 2025-100, to allow the timely consideration of the report and its recommendations. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hubley. Okay, is that carried? Carried? All right, now you are official.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chair. So the report that we would like to present to you today is our supportive housing audit. I'd firstly like to take a moment to thank city staff and the supportive housing service providers that participated in our audit for their efforts and their candid responses. We have with us today Dr. Tim Aubry, who is one of the 2 housing and homeless subject matter experts that we leveraged throughout the course of this audit. Tim's research has focused on community mental health services, homelessness, and housing first. I will now pass the presentation over to Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein and Ria Khanna, Audit Principal. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you and good morning. Under the Housing Services Act, the city is designated as a service manager and as such is responsible for the administration of housing programs related to social housing, affordable housing, supportive housing, and for the provision of supports for residents of the city that are at risk of or are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. As demonstrated by the picture on this slide, Ottawa's housing system provides a variety of housing options within the community to meet the needs of residents, one of which is supportive housing. The city defines supportive housing as a community-based, person-centered model of providing affordable, transitional, and permanent accommodation that provides a range of services and supports based on an individual's needs. Without these critical supports, residents are at greater risk of not being able to maintain and retain their housing, potentially leading to eviction and re-entering homelessness. In recent years, Ottawa, similar to other Canadian municipalities, has faced a variety of crises which have changed the landscape of homelessness. Persons experiencing homelessness are dealing with more complex and challenging issues and are requiring increased supports related to health, mental health, and substance use to retain and maintain housing. This has increased the demand for supportive housing and has put more pressures on the system, including the city and service providers. This is the reason why we decided to select supportive housing as the focus of this audit. Next slide, please. The objective of this audit was to provide reasonable assurance that the city has effective programs and services to oversee, coordinate, and deliver supportive housing. The audit primarily focused on how a resident of Ottawa accesses supportive housing and how they are supported. This includes assessing the governance and oversight over supportive housing, processes in place to assess needs, to then prioritize and house individuals within supportive housing, and ongoing services and supports provided to residents to maintain housing. For this audit, supportive housing included facilities that were specifically built to provide supports in-house, also known as wraparound services, and are referred to as single-site buildings. It did not include scattered sites where various ranges of supports are provided to clients within their existing housing. We should note that in Ottawa, the city only funds a portion of the existing supportive housing facilities in the area. I will now pass the presentation over to Ria to present the first 2 observations from our audit. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Joanne. During our audit, we observed a lack of coordination between capital, operating, and health funding, which has caused significant challenges for the establishment and sustainability of operations for supportive housing facilities. The first challenge is related to capital versus operating funding. Capital funding from the federal or provincial government for supportive housing does not come with operating funding for the delivery of supports to be provided within these facilities once they are built. Costs related to staffing, building maintenance, and programming are necessary to provide supports to residents in supportive housing. Not wanting to lose out on the capital funding, the city will go ahead with funding a build, and it becomes the city's responsibility to find the operational funding. Service providers take on the project with the expectation that operating funding will be made available. Given the limited funds and the various competing priorities within the housing portfolio, management indicated that it has been a constant exercise of reworking budgets and/or advocating where possible to find the operating funding to bring a new supportive housing facility online. However, this reactive approach is not sustainable. The city has estimated it needs $1.5 million a year of operating funding for every 50-unit supportive housing facility being operated. The city is already stretched thin within available operating budgets, and it does not have the capacity to continue both funding existing supportive housing facilities and bring new ones online without additional funds. The second area of challenge is related to health funding. The responsibility and funding for health supports is outside the jurisdiction and mandate of the city, and as such also outside of the OAGs. Health-related funding comes from the province and is provided directly to health-based organizations. Supportive housing providers must either access the funding directly from the province if their mandate is related to health, or they must partner with health-based organizations to access this funding and provide health-related supports within their supportive housing facility. We learned through this audit that recently, specific supportive housing facilities that were targeting higher needs clients did not receive the expected health funding to provide the necessary supports, and as a result, could not house the targeted individuals. While the facility was ultimately used to house individuals who needed supports, the intended higher needs clients could not be served. The siloed approach to funding is forcing disjointed supportive housing programs and services, resulting in not consistently meeting the needs of clients, the inability to house and support higher need individuals, and or those who have been chronically homeless for a longer period of time, and greater pressures on other frontline services such as police, paramedics, and hospitals. Next slide, please. The second finding relates to the processes to access supportive housing. Currently, there are several different avenues for residents to access supportive housing in Ottawa, one of which is through the city's Coordinated Access Supportive Housing List, which I will refer to as the list throughout this presentation, whereby the city receives referrals and subsequently matches chronically homeless individuals to the supportive housing facilities it has operating agreements with. The individual is then assessed by a service provider to determine eligibility and fit. The audit noted that the list is not a prioritized wait list. Clients do not get prioritized based on how long they've been on this list or based on need. It is an eligibility list that is intended to match individuals to facilities based on the supports they need. As long as an individual meets the eligibility criteria when they're referred, which are that they've been chronically homeless for over 180 days, are street living, or meet a specific demographic such as youth or Indigenous, they are placed on this list. Our audit did identify several challenges regarding the processes and tools related to the assessment and referral of clients to this list. When a supportive housing provider has a vacancy in their facility that is managed through the city's list, they reach out to the city to obtain a list of names of individuals. Supportive housing providers indicated that they get limited information about these individuals. As such, they have their own internal assessment processes to determine whether they can support and meet their needs. Ultimately, the service provider has the discretion to determine who they conduct their intake assessment with and has the right of refusal if they do not think the person will be a good fit. It is important to note that service providers become the landlords of their clients, in addition to providing the ongoing supports. They enter into a legally binding lease with the tenant, and so they tend to be more selective of who they choose to house. Service providers indicated that they need to consider the best interest of the potential resident and the interests of those already in the building. Our audit noted that service providers are not required by the city to follow a common assessment framework in determining who to select for their facility and are not obligated to provide a detailed rationale for those they do not select. The decision is based on judgment, and often it can be based on who they have experience with and or if the client has someone to advocate for them. As a result, there's a potential for inequity in the system. Based on the current processes and tools, individuals who have been in the system the longest and or potentially require intensive or specialized supports may never get housed because their needs are considered too high for the available supports. Next slide, please.
The next finding is related to baseline standards. The operating agreements between the city and supportive housing providers provide general, high-level expectations in terms of the delivery of ongoing supports to residents, including case management. The city, however, has not established baseline standards for supportive housing service providers in the provision of supports to residents. This includes the level of formality of care plans. Based on the files reviewed and interviews conducted at a sample of service providers, the audit noted that there is a range of rigor and formality in terms of development of care plans and the upkeep of the plans on an ongoing basis. Additionally, the audit noted that there are no standard mechanisms in place across service providers nor baseline expectations from the city to reassess the needs of clients to determine what is or is not working well for the client, if there are areas in which the client needs more or less supports, and whether or not supportive housing and or the facility is still the appropriate solution for the individual. Without formalized supportive housing standards, a baseline level of quality across all supportive housing facilities that the city funds cannot be assured. Next slide, please. The last finding is related to data management and decision-making. While the city is making significant investments in supportive housing, the audit noted that there is limited data being collected to help the city assess whether it is making progress with these investments, and if so, to what extent. Further, the audit noted that there are no established expected outcomes, key performance indicators, or targets related to supportive housing other than the 10% of all affordable housing units built should be supportive housing units. There are a few reasons for the limited visibility and lack of data collection regarding supportive housing. The city does not ask service providers to provide data or metrics outside of what it needs to fulfill federal and provincial reporting requirements to avoid adding undue administrative burden. Given the limited established outcomes and associated data collection, the city is not in a position to holistically understand the portfolio to better support strategic decision-making, given limited funding. This includes understanding and identifying gaps in support, the levels of need that are or are not being served, and what is not working well in the sector. Additionally, without indicators that are measured regularly, the city cannot demonstrate it is making progress against expected outcomes, nor does it have the data to support the business case to funders for additional resources. Next slide, please. We want to acknowledge that there is significant and meaningful work ongoing within the city and across the sector through its partners to support clients in need of supportive housing. We recognize that the city and service providers are spread thin in trying to meet complex needs and challenges of their clients. The demand for housing and support is outpacing the current ability to provide this critical care. Given the ongoing update to the 10-year housing and homelessness plan, there is an opportunity to reflect on the supportive housing portfolio to ensure that priorities and resource allocation align with the city's overall goal of reducing chronic homelessness. It is important to acknowledge that supportive housing is only one mechanism to address chronic homelessness. Continued investment in long-term solutions, such as affordable housing and in activities related to prevention and diversion, are needed to support the system overall. It is important to note that our office isn't not commenting on which of these aforementioned priorities funding should be directed to. The audit made 4 recommendations and management has agreed to all of them. This concludes our presentation. We would be happy to take any questions, including our subject matter expert, committee members may have related to this audit.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's any need for you to tell us the value of this audit. You technically probably have to do that, but I would say this audit is incredibly valuable to us, all of us, and to all of the people who are needing housing in this city. So I will say that I'm sorry I needed to tell councillors that I do have one delegation ahead of time because you've got your hands up, but determine if you're going to ask the delegation questions first. And our delegation is online, Roxanne Field from Waterridge Village Community Association. So we will hear from Roxanne first, and then if you have any questions for the delegation, we'll go to that. Roxanne?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good morning. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. As you may know, Waterridge is an urban community located in the old Rockcliffe Air Base in Ward 13 in East Ottawa. As an emerging neighborhood, we already have different types of supportive housing models that are quite successful. Veterans House, for one, and Habitat for Humanity is also very successful here. Today, I want to specifically speak to you about the new Ottawa Community Housing Project located in the heart of our neighborhood. I'm not here to tell you about all the complaints we're receiving from the residents, but rather I'd like to address the overwhelming number of complaints we are getting from OCH residents themselves. These people are terrified, angry, and stressed out. They do not feel safe in their own home, and this is not okay. This particular OCH model was geared to incomes of $50,000 to $120,000 annual income. And many of these residents are paying near or at market rents. Other tenants with deep addictions and mental health challenges also live in this 270 unit development. It is evident these tenants are in desperate need for appropriate wraparound supports 24/7 and 365 days a year. There is also a need for proper security measures, which would go a long way in helping the other residents feel safe in their own home. Currently, there is very little support and no security available to those living in OCH in Water Ridge. This most certainly affects the mental health and well-being of all the residents living at OCH. Suitable security measures should not be overlooked when considering supportive housing funding. They should be considered a form of support. This complex supportive housing model, which may be new, is not working as it stands. It's not meeting the needs of any of its tenants, and as a result, it is not working within the Water Ridge community at large. Our community is slated for more social housing. We know there may be another 475 units coming. Can you imagine how our community will react to this news when this OCH project is receiving such negative feedback within its walls and beyond? This community was extremely welcoming to social housing, and as an example, Veterans House, when they opened, the entire community baked goods for them. My kitchen was absolutely full of baked goods to deliver. We delivered baskets of baked goods. So this is a very open community. We understand we are an urban community. The Water Ridge Village Community Association is respectfully asking for provision and funding of ample and effective support services that are available, again, 24/7 and 365 days a year for individuals with addictions and mental health issues living in supportive housing, and to supply funding for security in supportive housing situations, and to hold community partners who receive funding accountable to ensure the highest quality support services are implemented and their buildings are safe and secure. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. I'm going to go to questions to you. I will just remind committee members that these are questions and also to be related to the audit that is in front of us. And Councillor Kavanagh, you're the committee member that's first on the list, but Councillor King is the councillor from the ward. So, okay, wonderful. Councillor King and then Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, Roxanne, for appearing before our committee today. The audit found that when tenants don't receive adequate supports, there are increased emergency service calls, property damage, and safety concerns. Have you witnessed these impacts firsthand in the neighborhood, and can you describe their added impacts to other residents and tenants?
Yes, absolutely. I live on, there are two main arteries into Water Ridge, and I live on one of the main arteries, which is Codds Road. Every weekend, repeatedly, there are fire and police and ambulance making their way to OCH. This is a regular occurrence. It also happens throughout the week, but it is intense on the weekends. I could give you a list of all of the people who have complained to us about what's happening within the OCH. I understand that sometimes people complain who live in the neighborhood where there's supportive or social housing, but when we're getting so many complaints from the people living there who are absolutely terrified, this is out of control, and there most certainly is a need for some kind of reparation here or emergency funding.
from the community's perspective, what does successful supportive housing look like? What works well in your estimation and what clearly doesn't work?
I'm not an expert, but from what we've experienced and from what we've heard, the support, I would say, is non-existent. A half day every 2 weeks to support these people who have deep mental health issues and addictions. They're just not getting the care they need, and it's impacting everyone around them. We feel for these people, and we think that the best solution would be to provide these individuals with the care that they require. And in fact, you say it yourself in your report that supportive housing is affordable housing that provides a range of services and supports based on the individual's needs. They're not getting it. They're not receiving that.
And I do appreciate that you, as well as the Wateridge Village Community Association, have been strong advocates for better resources and supports. You understand that these tenants are neighbors, that they require dignity, that they do require support and they have a rightful place in the community. I'm just curious, what specific gaps have you identified that, if filled, would make the biggest difference in both terms for tenants and the broader community?
That's a good question. Again, I think the gap is really appropriate implementation of services for these people. And I think good communication. I think there isn't good communication within OCH. Many of the people who are living there feel like they were told one thing and are living a completely different experience. And so I think improving communication would also go a long way to helping the residents of OCH. The residents of OCH are good people. The residents of Habitat for Humanity are good people. We have people on our board from both of those supportive housing. We know that they are part of our community. We just need to help those who really need the help and to communicate well, not only to our community at large, but to the people living there on the day-to-day. And, what we talk about security as not being, part of supportive housing, but it should be. And it should be part of supportive housing because it gives comfort to those who are living there who are not suffering from mental illness or addictions, but are living with people like that. Education and good communication is key.
Well, I appreciate the community association's advocacy, its open-mindedness, the fact that tenants or residents in the neighborhood are open to both the OCH complex, other social and affordable housing, but we understand the nuance in terms of the need to ensure that there is investment, especially in wraparound services. And what I can say is that OCH, despite the fact that it is a landlord primarily, it has embraced a complex care approach, and it is looking for greater investments. And I think that this report speaks to the need, especially for senior levels of government, to provide us with more dollars so that we can provide those wraparound services. So I really want to thank you for your delegation and for your representation of our community. And I just want to say that I know that on behalf of myself and many other people around this table, we will continue to advocate for those resources and work, frankly, with OCH, which has established an working group to address some of the specific challenges in the Wateridge Village community. But thank you so much, Roxanne, for delegating. Much appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor King. That's very helpful. Speaking on behalf of all of us, that was excellent. Councillor Kavanaugh.
And thank you very much for coming out today. And I appreciate the the reach out to Ottawa Community Housing. I'm chair of the board for Ottawa Community Housing, so I take it seriously when I hear these concerns. It's a place that we want to see people integrated. One of the issues that we've had, and this report shows this, is that as landlords, that's basically what Ottawa Community House is, we do not get operational dollars, and we have to work with partners. But to provide that, and it's woefully inadequate. But we know there's an issue. We see people on the waiting lists. They need housing, absolutely, but they also need support, and that's the missing link. And I really appreciate this audit for pointing that out. And you did mention about Ottawa Community Housing. I'm going to ask that they reach out to the community again, of course, with the councillor, because there's obviously a need. But we're struggling to find those dollars to, and this is what this audit points out, because it's not part of the mandate that was given to OCH. It was for people with low income. It wasn't on supportive. And that's got to change. And that is why OCH is putting forward a complex care model. And that is what we're trying to work towards. This report helps a lot to send that message to the other levels of government. So I hope that you'll help us to advocate to the other levels of government how badly this funding is needed for operational dollars, not just capital, which we've been very successful in. Mikinak is beautiful, but we need those operational dollars. I don't know if you have any comment about that. Thank you.
We'd be very happy to work with OCH and advocate on your behalf with all levels of government to increase operational funding. There's no way this can be successful without more funding. There simply isn't.
Thank you very much for coming out today.
And thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a question for you, Roxanne, but I just had a comment. The need that you're articulating is on the radar of the City of Ottawa Public Health, of which I'm the chair, and of community partners. We have been talking a lot and advocating a lot to the province about the need for wraparound services specifically for Ottawa community housing. And we do have a proposal in, it's called the Healthy at Home proposal, that does seek to provide those health and social supports for residents who are high acuity living in Ottawa community housing. So we have been socializing that. We've been advocating fiercely to the province, Ottawa Public Health in conjunction with our Community and Social Services Department. So I just wanted to let you know that that work is being done and we are advocating for it. And hopefully, as others have said, that this report strengthens the case that needs to be made. So just a comment there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair of Public Health, Councillor Kitts. Councillor Plante. We can't hear you. Maybe just microphone thing?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much, Roxanne. That was really, really interesting. As you know, we're dealing with similar issues just a little far away from you in Ward 12 in the OCH buildings that we have down here. I just had a couple of questions for you. You talked a lot about what is happening within the OCH buildings yourself and the people are coming to, which you sound like an amazing person, like a bit of a den mother to the community. So I just wanted to thank you for taking on that role, even if you didn't expect it. Do you notice a spillover effect into the larger Mikinak community, or is it just contained within the OCH buildings?
No, it's definitely spilled out to the larger community. We've had a lot of complaints from people, all kinds of unwelcome behaviors and crimes being committed here that are directly linked to the OCH community. There's no doubt about it. We have been working diligently with our community officer, and we have brought in Neighborhood Watch recently, which we're very happy about. So the community is very engaged and we are very welcoming. I mean, we also want equity. We don't want all of the social and supportive housing to take place in Water Ridge, of course, but we do believe that a diverse community is a wonderful thing. And so this is not a NIMBY thing, but it's more a concern for safety and health and specifically and especially those who really need support.
And I've been saying this for quite some time, which is because you sort of said, the people inside the OCH buildings are the ones who are suffering the most and feeling the effects of this the most. And, thankfully they have you to help advocate, but it's not the job of people who are already facing certain setbacks to have to advocate for more help. It's exhausting, frankly, to live that way. The one thing I would suggest is, and I'll speak to Councillor King with this after, but we have done some tenant meetings in my area. It sounds really simplistic, but, even just doing things like documenting incidents, how long it takes for security or police to get there, creating a spreadsheet, like these were things we had to do with the tenants and teach them how to use like a Google spreadsheet that everybody can contribute to. Because I find once you had kind of the numerical data, it was easier to advocate for more security, extra fobs on each floor, those kinds of things. So I'm happy to sort of have an offline chat with you to go over those things because again, we don't want to put too much work on their shoulders, but they do have to empower themselves a bit to advocate on behalf of their community. And having those kinds of tenant meetings, I found could be really helpful. So if you want to reach out offline, I'm happy to go over that with you.
Thank you very much. I will.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. C'est tout.
Merci.
Thank you, Councillor Plante. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Roxanne, thank you very much for your presentation today. I am grateful that the Auditor General chose to put a significant focus on the need for supports within Ottawa community housing in the report. You're not alone. Right across the city, where we've pursued a housing first strategy, putting people into housing without the necessary wraparound supports, we experience problems. I was just exchanging with Councillor Kitts about that very serious need we have for funding from the other levels of government in order to be able to ensure that those tenancies are successful and that the communities are able to fully embrace the residents who are in those OCH communities. I am just curious and quickly, do you phone OCH security? And if you do, what has been your experience of that?
So in short, no, I do not phone OCH security. As I understand it, this particular complex is managed through Arriva, and apparently they do not have a contract with the OCH security. So the only course of action is through the police. Okay,
that's interesting. I'll pursue that. I don't have Arriva buildings in Kitchissippi Ward at this point, but I'm interested to hear that. Roxanne, thank you very much.
I think part of the reason for that is the model has shifted, and that's why it's set up the way it is.
Yeah, and the Arriva buildings are a significant departure from some of the mistakes that social housing providers have made in the past, and we have more mixed communities, and that's all to the good. But that doesn't mean that there won't be issues from time to time. Roxanne, you're speaking on behalf of a lot of residents of Ottawa who are concerned about some of what they're seeing. Thank you for making the presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. I don't think we've met before. I'm Ariel. I'm the councillor for Somerset Ward, which has very similar challenges to Rideau Vanier and also to the community that you speak of. My question for you is, have you noticed a shift? Has it gotten worse in the last couple of years? And I say this simply because what we're observing is the seriousness of the poisons in the drug supply and the acquired brain injuries that people are developing due to multiple overdoses has really created a marked shift in behavior, which means simply needing more resources. So one of the ongoing areas of concern in my ward is a 24-hour drop-in center for high acuity people. And one of the issues is all of the chaos around the facility has just gotten worse as people have gotten sicker. which means we've now had to fund that facility, and they've just hired 2 outreach workers. So they're not just working on the inside, they're working on the outside. And I'm very interested to see how that works out for the community. So I'm just curious to hear from the community's perspective if you've seen a shift, because I think this is a reality that the city is really going to have to contend with, because the unwell are less well. And it's been really tough.
It's interesting, so I've lived in Water Ridge since phase 1, so 6 coming to 7 years. And OCH has opened their doors just over like 2 years. And we certainly saw a shift for sure during that time. But the amount of information and how naive I was compared to what I know today about drug abuse and the seriousness of these super drugs, or whatever they're calling them. They're just, it is out of control. And, I'm hearing things like people are going to those safe drug places, pharmacists, to get their methadone or whatnot. And they're taking those tablets and they're selling them to drug dealers so they can get their stronger fentanyl or whatever it is. And it's a vicious circle that's funded by who? So we need to figure out a better way for distribution so that they're not selling their drugs to dealers.
Right.
I think that's part of the issue.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no. And actually, if you've seen my public advocacy, I've been doing a lot of work on safe supply, as has Councillor Plant. Anyway, I appreciate that. And I want you to know that this issue of how we balance the need for high acuity services with the needs for community safety, this is a very hot issue, and it's a very urgent one that a lot of us are working on. So I appreciate you being here. Yeah.
It's not an easy task.
No, it's not, because, I have learned a lot in the last 3 years, and there's also been a real shift in the level of unwellness among that population, which means our strategies and the funding that we need needs to be much more comprehensive. And I've talked to almost every councillor around this table about this, and I'm rattling the cages as much as I can. So thank you. Your delegation was very helpful. We're working on it. Thank you. And I'm just going to keep my hand up for staff questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crosser. And thank you very much, Roxanne, for coming out and giving us a real life example here while we are about to discuss this audit. I will also, I think, Councillor Kavanaugh, if you don't mind, if you could read your motion in now, just so everyone can contemplate it, because you did reference it to the delegate. But thank you very much, Roxanne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. Whereas the Auditor General's report on supportive housing refers directly to the funding required from the federal and provincial governments for the City of Ottawa to operate much needed supportive housing in our nonprofit sector. Therefore, be it resolved that the Audit Committee recommend that Council direct the City Clerk to send the audit report on supportive housing to the following ministers at both federal and provincial government levels. And read I don't have the names of them put in, but we'll get that. Federal Ministries, Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, Health Canada. At the provincial level, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Ministry of Health. Thank you.
Lovely. So we'll vote on that after we receive our audit report, obviously, because now we're going to go to reports to the Office of the Auditor General, to questions, sorry. We're going to go to questions. The Office of the Auditor General has been waiting very patiently, but that, I think, was a very important delegation and discussion. And so good to have the Chair of Ottawa Community Housing here, the Ward Councillor, and the Chair of Public Health, in addition to all the rest of us. But that was very helpful. And of course, Councillor Leifer, Chair of Planning. Like it doesn't get any better than that. So who we have first here? Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the work on this audit. It's excellent. I was pleased to see that embedded in the report, there was acknowledgement that there's meaningful work in the city, and there was recognition that the city and service providers are spread thin, recognized the reactivity of the entire system that the city is faced to respond, and noted that despite this, we're still meeting the target of 50 new units a year. I'm also pleased to see Dr. Aubrey as a subject matter expert on this audit. Certainly as someone who's on community services, who's on OCH, who's on OPH, we see the cross-cutting issues. that the delegate just described with respect to the crises in homelessness, mental health, opioids, and despite all best efforts, we're leaving the most vulnerable behind because of a number of factors you pointed out. The discretion in the audit, the discretion for the service provider to select clients, the lack of funding from the Ministry of Health for those health supports that lead to eliminating the clients with the highest acuity, the lack of systems to support the most vulnerable. And so I just have a few questions around that specifically. I noted in the audit that you also spoke a little bit about Ottawa community housing and observations with respect to tenants causing harm to themselves, damage to the units, challenges within the community, which we just heard the delegate speak of. And so your audit didn't specifically draw the link between the that comment about what we're experiencing in Ottawa community housing, but I imagine that the lack of support for the high acuity that was in your report, that is a large contributing factor. Is that what I can draw the conclusion from your audit, even though it wasn't explicitly said?
Thank you for the question, through the chair. Absolutely. I think we started out this audit focused on supportive housing, but when we talked to different stakeholders, we couldn't obviously ignore what's happening out in community housing. And we didn't just talk to OCH specifically, but other community housing providers as well. And the challenges that are happening out in the sector are making its way obviously into community housing where it's based on the centralized wait list, and there are not, as the delegate and yourselves have pointed out, that they're not funded for support to provide supports and those wraparound services. We couldn't ignore that and felt we must point that out in this report. We do acknowledge that there are, and I think it was also mentioned already this morning, but there are at least strategies being looked at to try to help this both between service providers and community housing. But it does really fall into our overarching recommendations, because we are suggesting that the concept of supportive housing and who it's intended for really has to be relooked at as part of the 10-year housing and homelessness plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is any of us that have rent geared to income, particularly Ottawa community housing sites in our ward, see this all the time when providers have the discretion to choose and we're not getting those funding from Ministry of Health. We see problems exactly like what Councillor King's constituent just described. On that note, embedded within your recommendation, you gave a recommendation to staff to evaluate and integrate complementary models and approaches. These are things that are being worked on. And I think, as a member of OPH, we talk about healthy to home. Councillor Kavanagh mentioned the complex care. Also, with respect to Ottawa community housing, there's the Bumblebee project. Like, have you seen, you've seen this evidence that there are these initiatives being developed across the various organizations, have you not? It's just, it's really the funding, correct?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Absolutely. We see the innovation, we see the research, and we see the intent of all the partners, whether it's community housing, whether it's the supportive housing providers looking for opportunities to improve, because it's all recognized. I don't think we're telling anybody anything they didn't already know. We're just trying to highlight it. But it does come down to the funding. The community housing providers are not funded for this at all. They try to ask for or scrounge certain amount of dollars for things like security and things like that. But it becomes the reliance of the individual to access the needs that they can outside of the facility. But absolutely, the Bumblebee, the complex care are great initiatives, early days, to try to solve some of these problems, but it does come down to money.
And typically when you do an audit, you do a literature review and you look at, a variety of documents. Did you do any work to look at other audits that have happened in other municipalities across Ontario, or any work? And can you speak to, if you did do that, what were the findings across municipalities, and any comment versus Ottawa vis-a-vis others?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Actually, we did do a research because that's where we usually start with, is to look at other audits that have been done in other municipalities. Especially, we like to focus Canada, Ontario specifically, just because of some of the unique elements. And actually, this audit has not been touched. So supportive housing has not been looked at in depth in any municipality. And that's why we felt it was so important. Hence why we also used our subject matter experts to help us sort of fill in that gap.
Okay, interesting. And I think from a provincial level, there was a supportive housing audit done in about about 10 years ago, but that's really the only audits that have been.
Nothing recent.
Thank you very much. I'm just curious why you didn't include the scattered sites in the scope when there's so many. Is it just because you have to scope an audit, you have to decide somewhere? I mean, I know.
Chair, yes, that's 100% correct. If you could imagine, my team was working on this audit for an entire year, essentially. And that's in order to conclude on what we did today. The larger the scope, the greater the magnitude of work. And obviously, it's such an important issue that we wanted to ensure we were reporting timely to ensure that our recommendations were still relevant.
Okay, excellent. And I think I'm probably getting close to time. So I'll just ask one more question. From this audit and all the findings that you've discovered, you've mentioned a bunch of overlapping areas, including the implications for community housing. Have you seen other elements related that you would believe merit exploring in future audits? Do you have a sort of a laundry list now on things that you want to explore?
Chair, I'll start off, but I'm sure my team that is so in depth into this matter can speak even more to it than I can. Most definitely, as Joanne mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we struggled on what to scope. Do we want to look at emergency shelters? Do we want to look at community housing? Did we want to look at supportive housing? There are so many areas for us to look at here. I'm being cognizant of how much work we're also adding to, for example, Clara and her team. But the list is long, and only because we feel that we can add value and we can help.
Yeah, I imagine I look forward to having future discussions on that. Thank you very much for the audit. I'll hand it over to my colleagues for questions now.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And all I can say is a big, huge thank you for doing this report. Hallelujah. We needed this. We needed that overview of what's going on out there. And as Chair of Ottawa Community Housing, I'm well aware of the need. As has been pointed out by the delegation and my colleagues, this is happening across the city, that it's pretty obvious that people need supportive housing that are being put into rent geared to income housing, but without support. And this points it out. I think the key word that I found was the silos. That was the word that jumped out at me in terms of healthcare versus housing and how they're not coming together, and those operation dollars are not coming. I shared the report, of course, with our CEO, and to make sure that he saw it, and he's very happy that this is happening. This is really needed. Is there any observations related to the number of agencies and how we can create something together to deal with the levels of the levels of government on the need for the supportive housing?
Chair, thank you very much for the question, Councillor. I'll start off, and obviously my team can add. We don't comment on the number of providers or the number of housing providers that are out there. I think that's a little bit outside of our scope and our mandate. That being said, there is that need for coordination and collaboration amongst all in order to further this particular aspect.
And maybe I'll just add in to say that I think the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table will enable some of that, as well as organizations like the Alliance. And so I think the more people coordinate and collaborate, the stronger the voice. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't know if you've had a look at what is being proposed by Ottawa Community Housing for complex care and how you took that into consideration.
Chair, that wasn't necessarily the scope of our audit. As mentioned, Ottawa Community Housing and other community housing providers were not the scope. It was just an element that, as Joanne highlighted, that through our work, we realized that interconnectivity and the need to speak to the issues that we were identifying.
Okay. I'd love to hear from our expert here on what he found, in terms of this report, and how it could be used to be helpful moving forward.
Yeah, I think this is actually a very good report that identifies the critical issues that need to be addressed around supportive housing. And it's interesting, Councillor Carr's question about it didn't get into the scattered site with support. That's a different model, quite frankly. But the two have to work together. And I think listening to the delegation, the issue of intensity of support is critical. That's highlighted in the report. Some of the supportive housing programs, they really feel they're not giving enough support to the people, that the tenants that they're housing, and I think that's very important. The other issue, which is important, is that there really isn't in the field standards that relate to supportive housing. Something I said to the team more than once is, if you've seen one supportive housing program, you've only seen one. They're all quite different. I think the ones in the city do very good work. There's a commitment there really to help people. The other issue I think which is important is the whole issue of how do people actually end up in supportive housing in the city. And currently, because of the process, the prioritization process, the way it works, it's not necessarily the people with the highest level of needs that end up in supportive housing. And that's an important issue, because the idea of supportive housing is it's to be dedicated to the people who can't typically live independently on their own. And it typically makes up about 10 to 15% of the population among people who experience chronic homelessness. So those were, kind of the highlights, but I do think the report really hones in on, the issues that need to be addressed in the supportive housing programs in the city. Notwithstanding, like I said, I think the quality, from my experience in contacts with supportive housing in the city, is actually very good. But of course, it can always be better. And I think there's some avenues here that should be looked at to help improve the quality of the support, and also to help get the right tenants to get the right level of support.
I appreciate that. One thing I'm quite aware of is that the majority of residents in Ottawa community housing do not need supportive housing. It's you pointed out about 10 to 15%. I think that's roughly what we see as well. But they really need it, and it's very disruptive when people are placed among people who can't help them because they're just coping themselves. And we need that. That's why we're promoting the complex care idea in Ottawa community housing, and this very much supports it. What do you suggest would be the message to our provincial and federal governments in terms of improving this?
Chair, unfortunately, as this isn't part of our audit report, I wouldn't be able to have our subject matter experts speak to that, because that would be associated with our office and we can't make those types of statements. Sorry, Councillor.
Fair enough. I just have an expert here and it's worth picking his brains. Okay, thank you. I'll go back on the list.
All right, thank you. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Again, not a question, just some comments. I wasn't entirely surprised by what this audit uncovered, the needs exceeding capacity, that it's stretched and underfunded, and that we're reactive. speaking to the severe gaps that we're confronted with and a lack of coordination. But I do think that we are getting better at that as a city. The challenge is also that lack of coordination and the siloing is also reflected at the provincial level and has been a challenge in our advocacy with respect to that. So I just wanted to come on, as always, to say I'm grateful for your work. I am such a AG office fan, but you are giving us, not only stronger standards and KPIs that we can work with internally, but I think it adds a lot for, my advocacy and the role as chair of OPH and others around the table in their roles. I think it gives a lot of teeth to our argument. And I think with stronger KPIs and better standards, we will set ourselves up in a better position to move the needle. So I just wanted to say thanks very much for your work.
Thank you. All right. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, everybody. So as you know, my ward, Somerset Ward, is dealing with very severe challenges that are extremely similar to what Councillor Plant's ward are dealing with. And I'm one of the only councillors, I believe, who has a full-time social worker on my staff. And I had to do that because of the severity of the challenges in our neighborhood. Something that we've been hearing and that my caseworker, who is a social worker, has been saying for months was really validated by this report, which is that the folks in the worst shape are not getting housed and they are continuing to be on the street. And I just wanted to speak a bit about what that means. Last summer, I ran into an individual who was shirtless, shoeless, in fetal position on the road on Somerset Street in a puddle. Earlier in the day, he had been found eating dirt near local businesses. When I talk about folks who are in the most severe need, who are extremely unwell, that is the level of unwellness I'm talking about. And these are the people who are likely to be screaming in the street, displaying extremely erratic behavior, and causing challenges in terms of public safety because they are so unwell and so uncared for that this is where they end up. So I was just here's my question.
To be clear,
Yeah.
you're saying very important things for sure, but these are questions for the Auditor General.
Yes, no. And so this is my question. I'm wondering if you could speak more to this problem and what your research revealed in terms of who is getting these supportive housing spots and why, according to your report, the folks who are in the most need are not being housed right now.
Thank you for the question through the chair. What you described is exactly what the service providers that we've talked to described as well. They recognize that the needs and the complexity of the crises that are being experienced, they're seeing it every day. We would what you just said, we would agree, like our audit completely aligns with, and that is a challenge. It's a challenge inside of the supportive housing facilities, and then obviously to house them. So they recognize that as they take on this role of both providing support and being the landlord, that they do have to think about and have to decide who they house in terms of the disruption to the entire facility, to the bed, like what they can actually support, because most of the times if they don't have the proper amount of funding for the health and the housing supports, then they're not going to set the person up for success. So because of that, the more complex needs and the more acuity, the higher and higher acuity, and the less funding that they have, they realize that they can't, it doesn't match, so that they can't house them. And yes, that's what we've observed, is that these people with the highest acuity, the people who have been homeless the longest, we are not getting housed. So that's what our report had to say.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, I would like to remind, this is an audit committee, and if we're talking about numbers, a month in hospital costs $30,000. A month in prison costs $13,000. A month in shelter costs $6,500. And a month in supportive housing costs $4,000. And we have some excellent examples of highest acuity supportive housing in my neighborhood. But I will also say the building that you referenced that was supposed to house highest acuity and didn't get the funding is also in my ward. And what they're telling me is that the acuity level, they got people off the list that were supposed to be low to medium, and their needs are way higher than anything they've ever seen before. So I think something we're going to have to contend with as a city is the fact that the need is surpassing our resources. the condition of folks who are experiencing homelessness is much, much worse. I just have another question though, because it's my understanding that in your report, you say that 23% of they call the SPDAT forms, which are the entry forms on the current eligibility list, do not include an acuity evaluation. Do you know why that might be? It just strikes me as making it extremely difficult to place people correctly and ensure they have the correct level of support if we don't know really what their needs are before they come into the system. And this also really impacts Ottawa community housing as well.
So thank you for the question through the chair. Yes, so that number in our report, that we don't have the SPDAT score, or the city does not have the SPDAT score based on the audit work we did, was primarily because the Indigenous community will not use the SPDAT tool because it's deemed to it has challenges. So the city is challenged in terms of matching properly to the needs to a supportive housing facility. That's absolutely true. So it just even puts more further reliance on the service providers.
Do you have a sense of what tool the Indigenous community is using instead? Is there a way for us to get that data? Like, they're not using the SPDAT form, and I understand there's probably really significant reasons why, but I'm just interested in hearing from city staff. Are there other ways we can get that information?
This is just questions to the Auditor General.
Oh, it's just the auditor. We don't have other staff here. Okay. I'll follow up with social services staff.
Well, no, senior staff. So staff will be the next thing after we finish with the Auditor General. That's the way.
Oh, I see. Okay. I apologize.
It'll be the next. Councillor, the Auditor General has something to say.
Okay.
So I just wanted to add, you made mention that there were individuals placed that, were assessed as low or medium acuity and their needs seem to be significantly higher. And I think that's an element that our report highlights, is that it's a time and point assessment. And I think we all know our own mental health changes from day to day, hour to hour. So when you're talking about an assessment that's done and somebody that has needs, obviously those needs can evolve significantly in a short period of time.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering if you, as part of your audit, looked at the impact on staff in these supportive housing buildings when that happens. Because, of course, we're hearing about a high level of burnout among these employees. It's very, very hard to retain them, and we need people to be doing these jobs. Is that something you heard about?
Sorry, Councillor, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just concerned about staff burnout when exactly what we just talked about happens. When folks come in and they're not resourced properly, they're less well. I'm worried that this leads to a lot more turnover in the sector and certainly burnout. I'm just wondering if that is something you heard about in your audit.
Thank you for the question through the chair. Absolutely. We absolutely heard that in terms of even finding staff that will be willing to work, whether it's pay related or challenge related, all of the above. It's very challenging to find and retain staff. Absolutely. We heard that quite a bit. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you for the support. It was incredibly validating, and it really reflects what we're hearing on the ground. And I cannot stress how important it is to be able to appropriately house the folks who are the worst off, because they are the ones that are not only suffering the most, but causing the most chaos and upset in our community, and also costing the city in terms of our resources. So thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate everything you did.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor King.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank the Auditor General for this very important report, as well as Councillor Kavanaugh for introducing the subsequent motion to really advise the senior levels of government. This report on supportive housing is not just another audit. It's a roadmap for addressing daily realities that I hear from constituents about every day who deserve far better than our current system provides. The audit unveils a harsh truth that many of us have known. The current approach is failing the people who need it most. While we've been successful in building supportive housing units, we're operating with fundamental structural problems that undermine everything we're trying to achieve. And here's the reality that we have to confront. Federal and provincial governments provide capital funding to build these facilities, but then leave the municipalities like Ottawa scrambling to find the $1.5 million annually needed to actually operate these buildings. The reactive, crisis-driven approach is not just unsustainable, it's unfair to both residents and taxpayers. And what particularly concerns me as a representative of a ward that includes substantial, affordable, and social housing stock is that these problems aren't confined to supportive housing alone. You noted that community housing providers are increasingly serving complex clients without additional support funding, leading to safety concerns and evictions. How widespread is this problem throughout the city?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, again, the community housing was not part of this, officially part of the scope of this audit. So we did only speak to a small number of community housing providers. But even from the anecdotes or the discussions that they told us and the conversations and the work we did, we do believe that this is quite widespread. Because they're all taking residents from the centralized wait list, there's very little information that associated with that in terms of what they might be facing once they become residents.
Can you elaborate on the spillover effects you identified? What supportive housing fails to serve when supportive housing fails to serve high acuity clients? What happens to those individuals and where they end up?
Chair, I'll start off, and I'm sure Joanne can add a little bit. I think by nature, if you put an individual into a specific resident facility and they're not able to obtain the same level of support, so I think you've all heard it. It can result in very lengthy eviction processes eventually, and either they become homelessness, back in shelter. It becomes what can be a very vicious cycle, which obviously defeats the purpose of what supportive housing is trying to achieve.
And I know that Councillor Troster had mentioned the costs on the social system. So I'm just wondering about the audit itself in terms of mentioning increased pressures on other frontline services like police, paramedics, and hospitals. Did you attempt to quantify these downstream costs of our current systems failures?
Thank you for the question through the chair. We didn't attempt to quantify it as part of the scope of this work. It was obviously recognized the impact of this on those frontline organizations. It was reiterated and corroborated by everyone we spoke to. So we didn't quantify it, but we absolutely recognize it. And as Councillor Troster had mentioned, there was obviously statistics out there, not through our audit, but statistics out in the sector about the costs associated with that versus affordable or supportive housing.
Well, I appreciate those answers. I appreciate the audit. I think the audit really does underline the fact that the solution that we require is urgent action from every level of government. What we really need is the federal and provincial governments to step up, to recognize that their capital investments are meaningless without corresponding operating and health funding. And we simply can't continue expecting municipalities to absorb these costs while simultaneously demanding we balance budgets and maintain service levels. I think that message is very clear in the audit. The other element that I really just wanted to emphasize as well was that I wanted to acknowledge Ottawa Community Housing's innovation in developing a complex care housing strategy to help tenants maintain independent living. I think that's admirable. But what we're hearing very clearly here is that we need the resources in order to really effectively implement that strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, well said, Councillor King. Councillor Plante, questions to the Auditor General.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair. J'avais juste quelques questions au sujet du rapport lui-même. OK, à un moment, vous avez dit, excuse-moi, je vais aller le lire en anglais sur la page 9. To date, the city has not established baseline standards for the provision of supports within supportive housing facilities, which has led to inconsistencies and varying formality across service providers. Finally, the audit found that the city has limited ability to holistically understand and assess whether its investments in supportive housing are moving the needle. Since the city has not established any outcomes and has limited measures to assess progress, what kind of data would you suggest that they use? Like, are there municipalities who are doing better than us? Is there Like I mean, I understand the problem. I understand it actually very well. I didn't know what you thought the eventual data should be, and if that, should even be made public.
Thank you for the question through the chair. That's a fair question, and in fairness, and we do acknowledge in our report that it's not as if this is an answer that other municipalities have the answer to.
Right.
Obviously, we look at, and we do know that the city has reported on the amount of time that a resident maintains housing. And that's obviously a great measure over 1 to 5 years, and being able to establish a sort of a target and then work towards that to assess progress. There are obviously other measures in terms of how much supports and the type of supports that are being provided, such that it's moving the needle. But maybe I would also, and I hope I'm not putting him on the spot, but I might ask our subject matter expert if there's others that he would think might exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of outcomes, the primary one, of course, is do people have success in housing? So do they stay? How long do they stay? What are the evictions? Information about that. I mean, certainly in the research in this area, that they've gone beyond just housing. They're also interested in the quality of life, people satisfied with where they live, and with the kind of lives they're able to put together while they live in supportive housing. And then, of course, the other one, which is really important, is community integration. Are people involved in the community once they have stability in their housing? And that can include things like schooling, work, and of course, social kind of connections. So it's really, I mean, the idea of supportive housing, of course, is moving people out of homelessness into the community so that they can live as much as possible like everyone else.
Yeah, thank you. In French, we call that la cohabitation sociale. And I think that's a very important discussion to have, not for today, but it's a very important discussion to have in these situations. Okay. You noted that there are, I believe it's page 14 on recommendation 2 and 3, you're recalling for baseline standards, performance metrics, and guidelines. We have at the shelter level, and I don't want to get too much into this, but we do have shelter standards, but they're not enforceable. They're just kind of these best practices. Where do you see this fitting into the overall 10-year housing and homelessness plans, all of your recommendations? Like, is it that we eventually get these metrics so we can apply for more funding and we can show how much money we're saving or better quality of life people are having? Or is this report just sort of to talk about the larger issues?
Thank you for the question through the chair. I'd say actually it's both. Obviously, we wanted to highlight this as the current challenge, but it's not just to do that. There's, I think, and working closely with management, it's recognized that there's lots of work here to do, and using the renewal of the 10-year or the update of the 10-year housing and homelessness plan allows us to really the city to really think about what do you want out of supportive housing? What are you for supportive housing to do? Then all the strategies, the work plans, the standards can all come from that because it's all sort of working towards one particular goal.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think I would ask the same question of Professor Aubry. How do you find all of the recommendations and the findings in this report can be integrated into the 10-year refresh?
Well, I think they're very specific, and certainly they can be integrated into a multi-year plan, and I think they'll make a difference in terms of how supportive housing gets offered in Ottawa.
Councillor, also might be a question you could keep for staff, and we're almost at that anyways.
Anyway, thank you so much, Chair. I'm done. Merci.
Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. So if I were to pose a question of staff, could we transition over? I know I'm the last questioner. I have questions.
So you want to go first on the list right away? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I'll ask some questions of the auditor and then I have some questions for staff.
Okay, fair enough. You're not a committee member, but you'll finish with the Auditor General and we'll go over. We'll do it.
Amazing, thank you. So I have two themes that I just wanted to explore relatively briefly, I think. The first was I was taken aback through the course of the report and the discussion by the assertion that the failure of the province to fund higher acuity need clients has resulted in at least some of the supportive housing developments that we funded with capital dollars having to pivot. Can you describe the scale of that problem? Yeah, because I'm not aware of any in Kitchissippi ward that have not followed through on their plans to serve a particular client. Is this something that is common?
Thank you for the question through the chair. I'll caveat by saying, of course, our audit scope was only a limited, like we only got into depth with a limited number of supportive housing, but I can say that with the, even with that limited number of supportive housing providers, it wasn't just one off. There was more than one that sort of had this situation where they were expecting, and again, like our purview and the city's purview is in the health dollars, but whatever partnerships that they were planning on doing to address high acuity was not in the end provided, or it looked something different, and then and they had to pivot. So it's not just a one-off.
Okay, can you describe the timeline over which that happened? Is that over the past couple of years, over the past?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's in the recent, I want to say like 2 to 3 years. And I think I just want to add one clarification context to Joanne's response. So the city has, and I think we wrote this in the report, it has like a tier system. It has 3 different, like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And so not all supportive housing facilities are trying to have that integrated health component. So I just want to also say that that population becomes a little bit smaller in terms of who is accessing the health dollars. So I just wanted to provide that context.
Okay, I think I just want to make sure I understand that one properly, because the growth in population that requires supports and intensive supports in order to be able to be successful in their tenancies is growing really quickly. That is, I think, the fundamental underpinning of what we're reading here today. Is it that group that is being most affected by the lack of provincial of health dollars particularly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and in at least several instances over the past few years, provincial health dollars have failed to materialize to support providers who are intending to serve that group with the highest needs.
I will say yes, Chair, but I want to caveat that obviously the province funding is outside of our purview. So while we didn't fully dive into asking these providers exactly how much were you supposed to receive, how much did you receive, and going into those particular details. So I want to say yes, but also with that line within where my mandate stops.
Okay, it's something about which I'm deeply concerned, because the taps have opened at the federal level in terms of dollars flowing to municipalities to be able to build supportive housing. And our staff have appropriately prioritized those who most need that assistance. And if we're putting capital dollars into projects to house people who need intensive supports, I would like to think that the operational dollars are going to follow. So it's a really interesting finding here. I appreciate your highlighting it. The second theme that I wanted to explore was maybe a little loosier-goosier. Madam Auditor General, we appreciate all of the work that you do for the city. There's a bit of a script with respect to your reports. You identify things that need to be done. You make a number of recommendations. Our management generally agrees with the recommendations that you've made, and we move the needle. We become a better managed city and hold hands moving forward. I am wondering, with respect to this one, given the crisis that I read between the lines of this report, whether it is realistic to think that we are going to be able to bring the level of rigor to what you are suggesting with respect to gathering data, putting standards in place, being able to report to our funders what the problem is and how we're progressing in meeting it, when our city staff and staff who are working for our partner providers are firefighting on a day-to-day basis. I was exchanging earlier with Councillor Johnston, who says it's really hard to bring rigor to process when you're firefighting. How much progress would you expect to see in terms of being able to bring rigor? Do our staff have the necessary resources to be able to bring the rigor that you're hoping for?
Chair, I will attempt to answer that question, but I do think this is a question that management can probably add a lot more context to. I would say we're in a little bit of a vicious circle type situation. I do think gathering elements of the data is very important. I do think that staff likely have that capacity based off of what they've put in their management responses. That being said, they have historically held off on requesting certain information, knowing that service providers are already taxed. And, you kind of have to weigh your options. How much information do you ask for versus ensuring appropriate delivery of a very important service? So I would say we are in a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation. It goes back to once more funding is obtained, the providers will have more capacity, the city may have more capacity, but I would also, I look to my team to see if they have anything to add, but I think management can also add some color to that.
I might just echo, I think, it needs to start. I think it's recognized and hopefully it's recognized in the sector as well that, these are the steps that need whether it's, to get all these, this process in place to even support the ask, the advocacy, the information that goes out. I think the stronger that the sector, the city and the sector is, the stronger the position they're in.
We need to try and we need to start. But I think, you've had a good exchange with Councillor Troster with respect to some of the HR challenges in this sector. And so I know I will have tempered expectations of progress, and it'll be interesting to explore that further over the course of the development of the 10-year housing and homelessness refresh. So my next question would be for staff. I don't know whether you want to segue to that or.
Yeah, you're at 5 minutes there. So, sir, let's start off with now. We are done with questions for the Auditor General. Thank you very, very much. And questions for staff, Councillor Lieber.
So I'll ask the same question of staff, and then I'll leave the mic. What is the capacity of staff, and what is your expectation of being able to bring rigorous process to data and reporting when this sector is so underfunded?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Our ability to bring rigor and more scrutiny in the system is really going to be measured and developed with the community partners. So this is about a system of supports, as you heard, with tremendous complexity. And so we will work with the partners to identify, to Professor Aubrey's point, what is the data that is actually collectible and well interpreted to be able to advance the system that then we can actually provide regular reporting on.
I believe that you and academics and bureaucrats will be able to determine what that data should be. I am less certain that you'll actually be able to collect it, given the challenges that face the sector in terms of the day-to-day serving a population that is growing so quickly, and I am cynical on that, but my expectations as a city councilor will be tempered, as I told the Auditor General. Thanks for your procedural leeway there.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to staff. I just have a couple questions. Why did you not include, oh, sorry, I'm reading my wrong question. I wrote it down. Why hasn't the city already developed standards for supportive housing?
Thank you for the question and through the chair. So the City of Ottawa's involvement in supportive housing is relatively new. And as you know, through the 10-year housing and homelessness plan, it's to increase by 50 units every year. So at the outset, we were working with very few housing providers and very few units, and it has just since grown since about 2014. Speak up. 2014 or so, is that better? Thank you. So, and just on that, as there is no sector-wide set of standards like we have for the shelter system or the transitional housing program system, for example. But we do have metrics that we use. We do have standards that we use through our contracts. So we have service level expectations. We're required to provide funding reporting to our federal and provincial counterparts. So we do that reporting. In terms of standards, we do monitor service through our service reviews with our agencies every year and those types of things. So effectively, now is a very good time to get the sector together now that it has grown and now that we have a larger number of providers and units and buildings across the city. It's the time to get the sector together, and we welcome that opportunity through this audit.
What sort of challenges do you anticipate in working with the sector? Like in terms of the fact that the audit really points out the fact that there's an ability to select their clients. We see the neglect of the high acuity populations. What sort of challenges do you anticipate in this work?
Thank you, Chair. I think the big challenge, one of the ones that hasn't been mentioned here, is we have an immense amount of turnover on the staffing end, and we haven't really touched on some of the complexities with the agencies. These staff, many of them coming out of school, are dealing with very, very complex challenges. And as we heard that example from Councillor Trosser, that's the type of behaviors that our staff are dealing with. The burnout levels are very high. I think our biggest challenge is making sure that we have those adequate resources to support staff to be able to respond to this level of need, in addition to just having that wraparound support funding, which does include the health, as you've heard from here today. That is a big gap. The very encouraging part is with the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table being in place now, we're there to take on those big ambitious tasks of how do we tackle this as a sector, as a community. We have representatives on that table from the health side of things. So with the new 10-year plan that's being co-developed with that group, we are confident that we have the right folks around the sector to look at that systems level thinking to make sure that we can actually tackle some of those big core issues.
Thank you. And with respect, although it wasn't explicitly stated, like there's challenges with the supportive housing, with the ability for service providers to access those lists, the centralized waiting list. What sort of work is being done in terms of that, how we work with the centralized waiting list to maybe have a better system of getting people in place? That's the sort of work that will take place at the leadership table.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, so that's part of what we're going to be looking is we want to improve system flow, making sure people are getting into the right type of housing. I'll mention for the centralized waiting list, one of the really big exciting pieces of work we have coming up as a department is we have started just this month moving towards a digital platform finally for our housing registry. That's really going to support some of the connection into our housing and homelessness data systems throughout. So that additional flow through additional data collection is also going to help reduce people telling their stories. And we're also, as a department, working to digitalize most of our services so that these systems connect, that they talk, and that we can actually, from a data evaluation perspective, review the successes across the whole housing continuum as people move through the system.
Thanks very much. So you've got more of a client approach than a program approach, I guess, going forward when you're digitizing that as well. I'm happy to hear that we're reducing the amount of times that people have to tell their story and other impediments that exist in the system to our most vulnerable. Two more quick questions. Why doesn't the city housing and homelessness services ensure that health funding is in place prior to building a supportive housing facility? It was something that was mentioned in the audit.
Thank you for the question, Chair. It's really down to the system in terms of our funding system being disjointed, as you kind of saw through the auditor's presentation. Health funding, capital funding, and our operating funding operate completely separately. It's very often that these programs are brought to fruition very quickly with very quick expectations for the city to be able to act upon it. We set our targets in terms of what we're looking to develop through the 10-year plan. So we know we have to meet those as minimum targets, and happily we've actually exceeded them for the last couple of years. But in terms of the operating side, we do not have incremental funding that is tied to that capital funding. So what we typically need to do is we need to make sure we have those to be able to access that capital money, and then work on the back end to be able to find the operating health funding. Now, as you've seen, there are challenges with that, but without making that commitment to that supportive housing, essentially it's a non-starter. There's no point of bringing these projects to the other levels of funders. The other thing I'll mention is the great thing about supportive housing. If we don't get the funding for those level of supports, both on the operating and capital side, health side, it does make great affordable housing, because supportive housing also works for that purpose. So kind of as the worst case scenario, we have affordable housing. Best case scenario, we're able to bring in the operating and health funding.
Okay, thanks. And I'll just skip back to recommendation 2, which was that focus on the integrated supportive housing work plan. And it specifically had some sub-recommendations, one of them being the development of complementary models and approaches to support clients with varying acuity levels. And, you talked about the work that will be undertaken with the homelessness table. We've seen that there's a number of initiatives underway, Healthy at Home, Complex Care, Bumblebee Project. But there's an absence of funding. And another sub-recommendation of that recommendation 2 was to include advocacy with other levels of government. We've already been trying to advocate to other levels of government on those initiatives. So how do you see these objectives being able to be accomplished when to date, we haven't had a super amount of success with that advocacy of other levels of government? Like, what's the plan in order to be able to advocate? I mean, ultimately, and my colleagues have said it, I've heard Councillor King say it today, we need more attention. We need more funding from upper levels of government. That's who is responsible for this. And so, when I look at these recommendations, the city's done a lot of great work with partners like OPH and OCH. It's that funding that's missing. And what do you recommend? Because it doesn't seem to be heard.
Thank you for that question. And that is the important question. One of the reasons why management is pleased with this audit, it's because it does highlight that need. And that's one example. That's one way that this municipality is stepping forward and saying, we want to shine a light on this issue. At the staff level, we have been advocating in the system right through the beginning of the system. This is a natural flow of government funding. There are government silos, but there are also electoral cycles and other priority cycles that affect when funding is available, how the funding is available, what type of funding is available. And what we do very well at the local level is we coordinate with partners on the ground, and we're able to take advantage of that very important funding. And then in the background, using the plans that we have already approved, we have a long-range financial plan, we have a 10-year housing and homelessness strategy. We're able to have those strategies guide us in then making decisions in the back end about how do we move other funding around to make sure that if we have an opportunity to advance capital, that we also can put some supportive housing operating funding behind that. What is tragically missing is the alignment at the provincial level and federal level between housing and health, both on the policy level and on the funding level. That is bar none the greatest barrier. So there's a barrier of coordination at the provincial level. There's a barrier of commitment, I would say, and coordination at the federal level. We are very thankful of both those levels of government for all the funding that has been provided, but the integration with health is not present, and that's the biggest barrier that we're seeing. At the local level, we are best placed to coordinate, we're best placed to prioritize, we're best placed to innovate. We have the right partnerships on the ground. This is a new system, and we're growing the system. And so these are growing pains, if you like, that you see in the audit. This is exactly, as Deanna mentioned, the right time to shed a light on this. And so this is the way that we're doing it. It's through the audit, through the work at the staff level, through the work at the community level, the community advocacy that occurs, through our conversations with AMO, through our conversations with OMSA, through our conversations with other municipalities across the province and across the country, because we are seeing this issue across the country. And so we're very grateful for the audit, and we're very determined to meet the audit recommendations and work with the community to do so.
Thank you for that. And I just also add to work with council, because I think this is a council that wants to advocate to those upper levels of government. I think I can speak for almost everyone that agrees that this is one of our greatest priorities. And that's part of our challenge. I mean, we see that this is mentioned as a priority at the federal government. It's mentioned as a priority for the provincial government, but we're not seeing the solutions, the funding coming. So I'm certainly hopeful. I'm grateful to the Auditor General, as well as staff who participated in the fact that this is the first audit in Ontario on supportive housing. And I appreciate Councillor Kavanaugh's motion to direct the results of this to the upper levels of government to understand how complex this issue is and how desperate the need for funding is. I super appreciate everything you've done, and I didn't mean to infer when I asked the question that there wasn't the advocacy going on at your level. It's just not seeing the funding that we need at the provincial level and at the federal government level to solve these problems, which all levels of government have indicated are critical. So appreciate very much your contribution to this and your work on the next steps.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carr. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. That was so well said. And, we have, just for the benefit of my fellow committee members, we have been advocating to the province to close the gap on health and housing. I've met with the Ministry of Housing and the Ministry of Health, and, others have as well, to really reinforce that misalignment is hurting our communities. We did also hold a forum for health and housing leaders in December that brought everyone together. So when I spoke to, I think we're getting better locally on the coordination side, but the challenge still is on the advocacy piece and getting that funding. Councillor Carr and I think, are going to pull on the same thread a little bit, but it was good to hear that on the unit creation side we are doing well. And I mentioned Healthy at Home as one example of a proposal that does speak to the wraparound services, the more on the operational side. But I guess, are there other examples of things that the city is doing to try and secure long-term sustainable funding for operations as well?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I think around the health side of things, we've actually, following the pandemic, we had a much more tight relationship with Ottawa Public Health. So at least at the municipal end, our closest partner is Ottawa Public Health. And one of the conversations we've been having is very intimately tying our work with the 10-year housing and homelessness plan to health outcomes. The 10-year housing and homelessness plan itself is not set up to be a health services document. However, there is commitment, and we're having ongoing discussions with public health as how do we tie in, how do we cost out those health outcomes that we're going to need to be able to have success across the housing continuum. So that includes things like we're hearing a lot, it's not supportive housing, but the problems we have in OCH, so supports in housing, which is kind of a different model, as the professor had said as well. But it needs to be comprehensive. We very much know with our 10-year plan where we're headed on the housing side of things. So the work right now is tying in what do we need on the health accompaniments along with that 10-year plan, so that we're doing the two things in tandem and it's very clear to the public where the gaps are.
Okay, great. That's excellent. And I think you may have answered this earlier in response to Councillor Carr, but do we have opportunities when asking for funding to present a full cost integrated funding request to our provincial or federal partners, or is that simply, it's just that the way that the funding is set up, we don't have that opportunity? It's either pick one bucket or the other.
Thanks for the question, Chair. It is typically one bucket or the other, and that's as Claire had alluded to. We really do need that coordination or additional flexibility where we can pull together. Typically what we do is, even when we go to the Ministry of Housing, we do outline, again, with our partners, what those health costs are going to be. They're not going to fund those health costs, but we do outline the importance of those comprehensive models. The other thing which often happens when we're dealing with the funding is that there isn't the level of flexibility that we can move between different things. And also, as you can imagine, for housing funding, it's very directly tied to housing outcomes. Until very recently, we didn't have any flexibility to any type of health supports with housing funding. But again, we need to be very careful not to slip into using the municipality and making decisions to interlink health and housing with, like, i.e. funding health with housing funding, because we desperately need both. So the advocacy continues that if they're going to be separate, we as the municipality need to be presenting that combined need when we're going to our funders, and making sure that same funding need is being presented to both ministries.
Okay, excellent. I think that the point around flexibility also is needs to be a focus of our advocacy when it comes to both housing and health operational needs. So thank you for that background. My final question, just about the concern on the service prioritization decision and assistance tool. I'm just wondering what alternatives are being explored, or perhaps that question's a bit premature.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. So the service prioritization, the SPDAT is a decision assistance tool, is one that has been used for quite a long time, really going back. And it was through our Housing First program that was the decided tool. We're open to exploring an alternative. As you've heard through previous discussion, it's not used by the Indigenous community because it was not deemed culturally appropriate, and we respect that decision. And we work with our partners in the Indigenous community, for example, where they would assess their own clients for service. So that's an area to explore, certainly. We're also open to exploring if there's other potential opportunities for a service prioritization tool outside of the SPDAT. That would have to be also agreed upon through the sector. And lastly, just in January 2025, we also changed our intake form for supportive housing that we provide matching with to include more details, at least at that time of intake and assessment by the worker working with this client, to really outline the needs of the client that we have options for to provide housing. So for example, if somebody requires a primary care 24/7 type of thing, that's going to be noted on their intake form, and we would not then proceed to send their name to an agency that doesn't provide those types of supports. So those types of things are already in the works. We're open to exploring further. And of course, we'll work within the audit and the recommendations there.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that additional detail. I think we're all very pleased to be having this conversation today and to be shining a light on the challenges, what we're doing well, and where we need more support. And again, thank you to Councillor Kavanagh for your motion. I think that's excellent, and we'll be happy to support it. Thanks.
Councillor Kavanagh, and if you want to highlight your amendment that you're making to your motion.
Yes, just a
go
very
ahead.
small amendment. It was in the whereas, we just added, I'll read the whole whereas. The Auditor General's report of supportive housing refers directly to the funding required for the federal and provincial governments for the City of Ottawa to operate much needed supportive housing and much needed health and social services dollars to provide wraparound support within community housing for tenant support. Thank you, and I appreciate the rest of the same. Thank you very much for your support on this. It's important to put this in front of the eyes of those that are making the decisions to fund this, and frankly, it would save them dollars. This is not spending, this is investment. That's how it should be viewed, and I think that's what the Auditor General was trying to get across. I appreciate it very much. Right now, there's silos, and the big silo is between health and housing. That is the biggest one. And with Ottawa Community Housing, we're looking at complex care strategy, but we can't do it without partners. And you're aware of this. So the funding has to go to the partners. We've got, I'll just give an example, Salis, Ottawa Salis, Options Housing, John Howard Society, just to name a few. There's many others, but the work is underway. This is what we're trying to do. This is the pilot project we're working on, but we rely on those agencies to come in because we were never set up to be healthcare. And, but it's a combination to break down those silos, and we appreciate the support. There's about 50 housing organizations, many with health and social service agencies, and there's multiple city strategies that are in place here. How can we facilitate and incentivize the housing agencies to partner with these systems for a more integrated system? Is there a way to leverage the capacity and experience of those who have it in a more direct way?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I think that work is underway. So as you kind of mentioned there, Salis is a great example of they're both a housing provider and a healthcare provider. What we've really been doing in Healthy at Home is a great example. We also heard the complex care. Agencies like this are really good at providing expertise on both sides, and that how we as a municipality can put together funding things on the provider side that will help, but also speak the language of both of those ministries. So having those agencies with immense amount of experience and expertise help the city actually put together how that funding again, so it looks integrated from their experience working with those two ministries. I think the other part is working with our health partners like Ottawa Public Health internally is really, really important to be able to make those arguments again, speaking in the language that both fits housing and health side. That work has begun, and we have started seeing success in terms of just having alignment between the two and making sure that we use common language, working towards more common data so that we can see what's happening across the board. I would also say too, with those agencies, we really do need to focus on, as you had said, getting the funding directly to them. They know their clients the best. The city, at the end of the day, for the most part, we act as service manager. We don't provide a lot of these services directly. So it is, again, and you'll see in our management responses, it's making sure that we work with them to develop these tools, systems that can get that kind of stuff together in a comprehensive way.
Thank you. It's a good time to mention that the Ottawa Community Housing Corporation AGM is within the council meeting on June 11th. And this is an opportunity to discuss this as well in terms of the complex care strategy and show our support for it, because we need to show that that can be done. It does concern me, the silos. That was the key word in the document. And I want to know how we break them down. And we have the model with the complex care, and already we're doing internally the partnerships. So we're breaking down the silos ourselves. We have been for years. We just don't have the capacity to grow it. That's the problem. I just want to get a sense of what kind of growth we're looking at, and how we're accommodating, or we would like to accommodate it, I guess is better said.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of how I would say we're breaking the silos, as we kind of know, as a municipality, we have limited ability to do that. So as Councillor Kitts had mentioned, Clara and Vera had hosted a health and housing leaders forum. I think the step one is making sure that if our senior levels of government aren't coordinating, that we're putting the puzzle pieces together and coordinating on the municipal end, which has already actively been happening. I think that's the best way. And I'll say too, kind of expanding it beyond when I mentioned public health, we also had hospital leaders there. As we know, one of the huge things is hospital outflow coming into the shelter system, coming into supportive housing without their needs being met. And as you had also alluded to, this is a cost saving measure. So it's working with those different providers on the municipal end to make that return on investment argument, to also make sure that, again, when we're bringing funding proposals forward, that kind of thing, that if you're not going to coordinate, we'll coordinate for you, and kind of present it in that way and show that a comprehensive model does work and it's needed to have those long-term housing outcomes.
Thank you. And OCH is very much a willing partner on this. It is helpful to have the data on where it actually saves. And perhaps Professor Aubrey can help us on that, and other experts in the field. Would you agree that would be very helpful?
Chair, we would agree. And on the Healthy at Home, in that proposal, it's very well documented. The money that could be saved in supportive housing, as opposed to in hospital, for instance, or in incarceration, it's very well documented. So we do have that information. And the important thing is to use that information when we lobby, let's say, the Ministry of Health for funding. But to Kale's point, we want to present the coordinated, integrated picture to those levels of government, so that when we receive the housing funding, we can immediately use that housing funding together with the health funding on the ground. So we're not suggesting that the city would receive health funding. The people best placed to activate on health funding are the health transfer agencies, and that's why we work so well on the ground and our partners, and we're building that coordination on the ground to be able to leverage the funding they can receive to be able to contribute to the integrated system of supportive housing.
Thank you. And I think we can start with pilot projects and show how well these can work. We've also got Matthew Perry Foundation coming up, and I think that will be very helpful as well. Another type of supportive housing that's partnered with Ottawa Community Housing, who's working as the developer. So we have opportunities to shine a light on how this can be done, and I appreciate the work of staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair, and I really do appreciate the questions from my colleagues. I think you took a lot of the questions once again that I would have asked. Councillor Carr, concerning the role that the city should play in advocating for better coordination from federal and provincial governments, as well as Councillor Kitts asking questions about integrated financial models. And I really want to thank her for her advocacy as chair of Ottawa Public Health. I know it's been ongoing. It's tough sledding, but we appreciate it at council, as well as the advocacy from Councillor Kavanaugh around more investments in our complex care at Ottawa Community Housing. So I do appreciate that. Since questions have been asked there about advocacy as well as financial models, I have some questions that are outstanding on implementation. So given that the audit coincides with the 10-year plan update, how will staff ensure that audit recommendations are integrated into the updated plan?
Thank you, Chair. I think primarily where we see the alignment with the 10-year plan is tying together those capital projects with the operating funding and laying out a plan for that. As we've kind of heard today, that the 10-year plan sets that overall guiding vision in terms of those targets, which is eventually tied into our long-range financial plan. And I think when we go to update that based on our revised 10-year housing and homelessness plan, that's where I see the most alignment, is making sure that those targets, those outcomes are housing focused. I think we say this all the time when we're before committee. We really do not want to be doing more shelters. So the 10-year plan is going to have much more of a focus on doing what needs to be addressed on the chronic homelessness end. One of the primary things, especially for those high needs, very expensive to support shelter clients, is appropriate supportive housing. So again, working with that housing and homelessness leadership table, we're going to be trying to implement upstream. And again, supportive housing is one of those key elements that's continually growing based on client needs, that we're going to have to be part of that upstream strategy.
Well, I really appreciate that answer, because I do believe, and I know all of us around the table believe, that housing is a human right, and obviously the best solution to homelessness is a home. So I'm appreciative of that approach. My other question around implementation revolves around the timeline. So while the full implementation timeline extends to 2026, what concrete actions will staff be taking in the next 6 months to begin addressing the most critical issues identified in the audit?
Thank you, Chair. The reason you'll notice in the recommendations, it's 2026, because this does involve an immense amount of work working with those sector partners and agencies that are the experts in this. The City of Ottawa does not directly deliver supportive housing, so it's really the time that gives us to do that. That work is going to begin immediately. So this is many of the things in the audit recommendations were supported by our supportive housing providers as well. So we're going to start as we go through with the working group that's going to be addressing many of these recommendations. We'll be implementing them as we can. So although the full comprehensive standards may not be done by that point, some of the things will start to be addressed immediately. One of the concerns noted in the audit was really around our program reviews. We already have a process in place of how we're going to start to integrate that a little bit more directly into programming. So some of these things will be done much sooner than that, but it's again, the comprehensive standards is, as you heard from Professor Aubry, there is no gold standard for how exactly to do supportive housing. It's quite complex and the models are quite different even among our supportive housing providers. So again, creating something that there isn't a evidence-based exact way to do it really does require those partnerships and expertise of multiple sectors and the supportive housing providers.
And one last follow-up question. I'm just wondering if the upcoming housing needs assessment will actually feed into the data that's necessary for us to make decisions on this issue.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So one of the big things, the housing needs assessments, which is going to be presented through a technical assessment on June 27th, it does go into these type of things across what's our needs across social, affordable, supportive housing. It also talks a little bit to the acuity, the level of need we're seeing in our community. So that's going to help us when we go through the exercise in the fall for the 10-year plan of actually setting our KPIs, our performance targets around that.
Well, thank you so much. I think I've heard a very clear message from the audit, from our residents, from staff, and from our colleagues. We definitely need more money, and we need the senior levels of government to help us bridge the gap between health and housing so that we can provide wraparound services to the benefit of our most vulnerable in our community and in our city. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much. So before we go to the recommendation, because first we're going to look at the actual audit recommendation, I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments. Number one, I was glad to hear that technology will help you with the data. I know you might all want to roll your eyes every time I say the word technology. However, it is critical, and it seems like across our entire city, we are improving the technology use that will help us with the data. So really glad to hear that. The other thing I was going to say is that the gold standard, well, I was going to say a couple things. KPIs are very difficult to write, so good luck with them. Because, we look at trying to create them on the Police Services Board, and they're very, very difficult to write and then to figure out if you can really measure. But anyways, good luck, genuinely. The gold standard in terms of what wraparound care is, I think is something that I'm hoping to look more at in various reports. There's wraparound care that's Queensway Carleton Hospital, the ACE unit, where people are literally, as they say, cocooned. Like the wraparound is in every single direction a person is helped. That is not the case when we're talking wraparound care in so many different facilities. People have all kinds of different ideas about what wraparound care means. So I would definitely look for someone measuring that a little bit more accurately. And then the last thing I would say is, we absolutely are going to talk about getting more attention and funding from different levels of government, but we can't forget our Ottawa Community Foundation. The philanthropic component of our society is significant, and they are constantly asking to be a bigger part of our community, our council decisions. So that's another component. But really, as everyone has said, thank you very much for a fabulous audit. We'll move to the recommendation, and then we will talk about Councillor Kavanaugh's motion and have a few comments on that. So the report recommendation is that the audit committee receive the audit report and recommend that council consider and approve the recommendations. Is that carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Now, if we can get Councillor Kavanaugh's motion up on the screen, we'll look at that. And I just wanted to ask the Auditor General, in terms of this motion, if you have a comment, given you have in past sent your audit around and what you might want to say about this.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to make a comment. And Councillor, thank you, because obviously this is assisting and helping one of the recommendations that we have made. I would just ask, if possible, because our audit did not focus on community housing, if that piece could maybe be in a separate bullet, not directly associated with our audit, because it's technically a bit of an incorrect statement or could be misleading. I know it's not for me to make those general comments, but it's just a point I wanted to highlight. But I also did want to state that one of the elements that I always do in my role is to inform my colleagues in the audit world with respect to the work that we do. And so I will be raising obviously the issues that we have identified to the Auditor General for the province of Ontario and the federal AG as well.
That's great to hear that that will go to other areas. Councillor Kavanaugh, what do you think about working on it between now and council, or what would you prefer to do?
Yeah, no, I appreciate all the comments, and it has to be accurate to reflect the Auditor General's report. I don't have a problem. I'm just asking a question. Would it be sufficient to just end it after to provide wraparound support and not have the last bit there?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Right. I think
Chair,
step.
could I ask for a friendly amendment on, I just
Sure.
noticed something.
Go for it, Clara.
So the wording in the first paragraph mentions the City of Ottawa operating much needed supportive housing, and we would respectfully ask for that to change to fund the operation of much needed.
Okay.
Okay, so do you want to work on it between now and council?
Yeah.
Make sure you get, because you may want to put in the ministry names, and remember how you were saying earlier that, sure.
Sure. I think we can do that. Marty, you want to second it? Yeah, we go to council? Yeah, okay.
I don't know if I need to if it comes as part of the report,
Yes, so, okay, Eric?
but if it does, sure.
So there are this is the whereas that we're talking about.
Yes.
So if you want to just pass, we'll pass the actual motion and fix your whereases later when you actually introduce it at council.
Yes, and yeah.
I'm getting good at this.
The worst approach tonight.
Okay, it would have no whereases then when it comes to council if we just take out this whereas. What would you like to do? How about you just work on it between now and council?
Sure.
Because you may want to add some more whereases because you did this quite quickly and.
I've got another half hour to discuss it if we all want.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that, Councillor Carr. It's very helpful.
I'll get her done.
Okay, so why don't we do that? We'll leave it, work on it between now and
Yeah,
council.
don't-
And then, so given that, you're okay with that, Councillor Kavanaugh?
Yeah, I appreciate the input from the Auditor General and from city staff.
Yes, no
I
kidding.
think
Thank
we're
you
all
very
set.
much. Okay, so now we then just go to, are there any in-camera items? No. Notices of motion, anyone? No. Inquiries? No. Other business? No. And we are adjourned. Next meeting is Friday, September 12th. Have a great summer.